The elevator plunged like a stone dropped into a bottomless well. Metal screamed against metal as emergency brakes failed one by one. Lights flickered, dying fireflies in a metal coffin. Inside the falling box, 10-year-old Chloe Hale's scream pierced the chaos, cutting through her mother Madison's practiced composure. Madison's silver dress, selected for tonight's charity gala, for the speeches about urban renewal and affordable housing, suddenly felt like armor too thin for this battle. She pulled Chloe against her chest, her heartbeat a wild drum against her daughter's ear. Fear wasn't a familiar companion to Madison Hale, CEO of Hale Development. She built skyscrapers. She transformed city blocks. She closed nine-figure deals without flinching. But as the elevator cable snapped somewhere above them, her empire of steel and glass meant nothing. "Mom," Chloe whispered, her voice small as a lost penny. "Are we going to die?" Before Madison could find an answer untainted by terror, the elevator jerked violently, then slowed. Not stopped, but no longer in free fall. A voice crackled through the emergency speaker mounted in the corner of the ceiling panel. "Ms. Hale? Chloe, can you hear me?" The voice was male, steady as bedrock. "My name's Daniel. I've engaged the secondary emergency system. You're going to be okay, but I need you both to listen carefully." In the maintenance control room, Daniel Brooks wiped sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his janitor's uniform. His other hand remained steady on the manual override lever he'd just activated, a system most maintenance workers didn't even know existed. But Daniel wasn't most maintenance workers. His eyes darted between the elevator's diagnostic panel and the security camera feed showing the two frightened faces inside. The mother trying to be brave, the child not bothering to hide her fear. He'd need to get them out quickly before the secondary system failed too. "I'm going to try something," Daniel said into the microphone. "But first I need you both to breathe with me. Chloe, can you count to 7 for me?" Inside the elevator, Chloe looked up at the speaker, confusion momentarily replacing terror. 7? That's right. 7 is my lucky number." Daniel's voice remained calm, as if they were discussing the weather instead of hanging by threads between life and death. "Count to 7 while you breathe in through your nose, then count to 11 breathing out through your mouth." Madison watched her daughter's shoulders drop slightly as she followed the instructions. This stranger's voice had accomplished in seconds what she'd been trying to do since the elevator's first terrifying lurch. "Good job, Chloe," Daniel continued. "Miss Hale, I need you to brace against the back wall. I'm going to try to bring the elevator to the nearest floor, and there might be a small jolt." Madison pressed her back against the wall, still holding Chloe close. "We're ready?" Daniel took a deep breath, calculating angles, forces, and timing in his head. Engineering instincts never died, even buried under years of pushing mops and unclogging toilets. He pulled a sequence of levers, watching the diagnostic lights shift from red to amber. The elevator shuddered, then began a slow, controlled ascent to the nearest floor. When it reached the 37th floor, Daniel locked it in position, but the doors remained stuck. "I need to pry the doors open manually," he explained through the speaker. "Hang tight for another minute." He raced from the control room to the 37th floor, taking maintenance stairs 2 at a time. When he reached the elevator, he wedged his crowbar into the seam between the doors and leveraged his weight against it. Slowly, the doors parted enough for him to get his fingers in. With straining muscles and gritted teeth, he forced them open wider. Inside, Madison and Chloe blinked at the sudden shaft of light. What they saw wasn't the polished building, security, or emergency personnel they might have expected, but a man in a gray janitor's uniform with Daniel stitched above the pocket. His face showed the focused concentration of someone solving a complex problem. "I can get her out first," Daniel said, extending his arms toward Chloe. "Ms. Hale, can you lift her up toward me?" Madison boosted her daughter toward the opening. Daniel's hands, calloused, strong, steady, reached down, careful not to grab, but to support. "I've got you, Chloe," he said softly. "You just need to reach for me." Chloe hesitated, her small body trembling. "Hey," Daniel said, his voice softening further. "Remember how we counted to 7? Let's do that again. On 7, you reach for my hands. Deal?" Chloe nodded. They counted together, and on 7, she stretched her arms upward. Daniel's hands wrapped around hers, secure but gentle. "That's it," he encouraged as he lifted her through the gap. "You're doing great." Once Chloe was safely on the floor, Daniel turned his attention back to Madison. Your turn, Ms. Hale. Madison's silver dress complicated matters. I don't think I can. With all due respect, ma'am, you can. The certainty in his voice was like gravity, a force of nature that couldn't be argued with. I won't let you fall. There was something in his confidence that steadied her. Madison reached up, feeling his calloused hands grasp hers. Unlike the business handshakes she was accustomed to, performative, calculated, his grip spoke of solid things: work, reliability, promise. With surprising strength, he pulled her upward through the gap. For a moment, suspended between the elevator and safety, Madison found herself eye to eye with her rescuer. What struck her wasn't fear or panic in his expression, but focus, the look of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done, and how to do it. As her feet touched solid ground, Madison exhaled the breath she'd been holding since the first alarm. Chloe immediately rushed to her side, burying her face in Madison's dress. Thank you, Madison said, straightening her posture and finding her CEO voice again. You've just saved our lives, Mr. Brooks, Daniel Brooks. He wiped his hands on his janitor's uniform, suddenly aware of the contrast between his work clothes and her evening gown. Just doing my job, Miss Hale. Madison tilted her head slightly. Elevator rescue isn't in the standard janitor job description, Mr. Brooks. A small smile crossed his face. Maybe it should be. Chloe tugged at Daniel's sleeve. How did you know 7 was a good number? He crouched to her level, the way he always did with Ethan. 7 is the number of days in the week, 7 colors in the rainbow, and 7 seconds is just about how long good, deep breath takes. Chloe's eyes widened. That's why it worked. Daniel nodded. Fear forgets to breathe. Breathing reminds fear who's in charge. Madison watched this exchange with growing curiosity. This janitor spoke to her daughter not with condescension, but with respect, as if Chloe's questions deserved thoughtful answers. It was the same way Madison spoke to Chloe, yet so different from how most adults address children. Before she could say more, a building security team rounded the corner, followed by her assistant Nora, whose face showed equal measures of relief and professional concern. Madison, thank God, Nora exclaimed. The gala guests are wondering where you've disappeared to. We need to get you back before the donor speeches. Just like that, the real world rushed back in. Madison smoothed her dress, duty calling her back to the role she played every day. Of course. Please inform them I'll be there momentarily. She turned to Daniel, extending her hand formally. Mr. Brooks, I can't thank you enough. He shook her hand briefly, a professional courtesy, then stepped back toward the maintenance door. Just glad I was nearby, Miss Hale. As Madison walked away, Chloe looked back over her shoulder at Daniel. She waved, a small hand saying more than words could. Daniel waved back, then disappeared through the service door, back to the invisible world that kept the visible one functioning. 6 years earlier, Daniel Brooks had sat in a conference room not unlike Madison Hale's, wearing a suit that cost more than his current monthly salary, explaining to project managers why they needed to add another $500,000 to the Morgan Tower budget. Not for aesthetics, not for luxury finishes, for safety. The soil reports show irregular density patterns, he'd explained, pointing to charts and graphs that told a story most people couldn't read. If we don't modify the foundation design, we risk differential settlement over time. James Whitfield, his business partner, had rolled his eyes behind the clients' backs. Later, in the privacy of their firm's office, he'd confronted Daniel. You're killing us with these last-minute changes, James had said. The clients are already nervous about the budget. We need to project confidence, not create problems. Structural integrity isn't creating problems, Daniel had countered. It's preventing them. Look, we've got the contract. Let's just build the damn thing and move on to the next project. The foundation design is fine as is. But it wasn't fine. And 3 months later, when the east wing of Morgan Tower showed the first hairline cracks, Daniel had known exactly why. By then, it was too late to prevent the partial collapse that injured 3 workers and triggered the investigation that ended his engineering career. The truth that James had substituted lower-grade materials without telling him would have saved Daniel's reputation, but destroyed James's family. With a wife battling late-stage cancer and 3 young children, James faced not just professional ruin, but potential criminal charges for the code violations. So Daniel had made a choice. He'd shouldered the blame, lost his license, watched his marriage crumble as his wife, who'd married an up-and-coming engineer, not a disgraced one, decided she couldn't bear the downgrade in lifestyle and expectations. That had been the second worst day of his life. The worst came 3 months later when she'd left for good, leaving 8-year-old Ethan with a father who suddenly had to rebuild everything from scratch. Now, at 40, Daniel's world had narrowed to his son and the steady work that kept a roof over their heads. He'd constructed a new life with the same care he'd once designed buildings, from the foundation up. First, stability for Ethan, then dignity for himself. Their small apartment wasn't much by Manhattan standards, but it was home. Engineering textbooks lined the shelves. Half-finished models of bridges and buildings covered the kitchen table. On the wall hung Ethan's drawing, "My dad fixes everything." The everything was underlined 3 times in red crayon. That night, after the elevator incident, Daniel arrived home later than usual. Mrs. Ferris from next door had watched Ethan, as she often did when Daniel's shifts ran long. "He's asleep," she told Daniel quietly. "Finished all his homework and even helped me fold laundry. That boy of yours is something special." "He is," Daniel agreed, slipping Mrs. Ferris her usual $20 despite her protests. "Thank you for staying late." After she left, Daniel checked on Ethan, who was curled around his worn stuffed dinosaur, dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that made him look younger than his 8 years. Daniel brushed the hair back gently, careful not to wake him. In the kitchen, he made himself a sandwich and pulled out his notebook, the one where he still sketched building designs, foundation systems, structural solutions to problems no one was paying him to solve. It was a habit he couldn't break, like a pianist who'd lost his hands but still heard symphonies in his head. Tonight he sketched the Hale Tower elevator system, noting the flaws in the emergency brake design. It was the kind of thing he'd have brought up in a project review meeting back in his previous life. Now it was just a note in a journal no one would ever read. As he sketched, his mind kept returning to Madison Hale. He'd recognized her immediately, of course. Her face was on billboards throughout the city, on the cover of business magazines, sometimes in the society pages at charity events. What had surprised him was her composure during the crisis, the way she'd focused on comforting her daughter, rather than demanding someone fix the problem immediately, as many executives might have done. And the look in her eyes when he'd pulled her from the elevator, not the entitled relief of someone who expected to be saved, but the genuine gratitude of a human being to another human being. For a moment, they hadn't been CEO and janitor, just 2 people connected in crisis. Daniel closed his notebook. Such thoughts were pointless. Tomorrow, he'd go back to being invisible, pushing his cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors of Hale Tower, while Madison Hale ran her empire from the corner office on the 60th floor. Different worlds, different orbits, a momentary intersection already fading into memory. The gala continued as if nothing had happened. Madison delivered her prepared speech about urban renewal, her voice steady despite the tremor still living in her hands. Wealthy donors nodded appreciatively, checkbooks at the ready. The crystal chandeliers cast perfect light on perfect people, making perfect promises about helping those less fortunate. But Madison's mind kept returning to the moment of suspension, hanging between danger and safety, held by hands that knew what work really meant. Something about Daniel Brooks had unsettled her carefully constructed world, though she couldn't yet name what it was. That night, after tucking Chloe into bed, Madison sat in her home office overlooking the city. The penthouse offered a view most people only saw in photographs. Manhattan spread out like a galaxy of earthbound stars. From here, the city looked orderly, manageable, designed. Madison opened her laptop and did something she rarely did with employees below executive level. She searched for Daniel Brooks in the company database. His file was sparse, hired 18 months ago as part of the maintenance staff. Exemplary attendance record, no complaints, no commendations either. Just the invisible middle, the people who arrived, did their kind, and went home without fanfare. His emergency contact was listed as Ethan Brooks' son. No spouse, no other family. Madison closed the file, feeling strangely like she'd intruded on something private. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, Riverton Project, Structural Concerns. She sighed, opening the message. The Riverton development was Hale's largest current project, a mixed-use complex that would provide both affordable housing and commercial space in a previously neglected neighborhood. But the project was behind schedule and over budget. The latest engineering report had identified structural issues with the foundation design that would require extensive reworking. Madison rubbed her temples. Riverton wasn't just another project, it was personal. The development was going up in the neighborhood where she'd grown up, before her own mother's real estate investments had lifted them into privilege. She'd promised the community something different, not gentrification that pushed families out, but revitalization that brought opportunity in. Now it seemed that promise might be delayed indefinitely. The engineering firm recommended a complete redesign that would add months to the timeline and millions to the budget. There has to be another way, she murmured to the empty room. Her phone buzzed again, a reminder of the upcoming Bachelor Selection Gala her publicity team had orchestrated. The event had started as a joke between Madison and her friend Claire, a comment about how the board kept pressuring Madison to settle down with someone suitable since her husband's death 4 years ago. Claire, who ran Hale's marketing department, had spun it into a charity fundraiser, an evening where the city's most eligible bachelors would be presented, with donations benefiting urban youth programs. It had seemed clever at the time. Now, with Riverton in trouble and the memory of real danger still fresh, the whole concept felt hollow. But the invitations had been sent, the venue booked, the press alerted. The machine was in motion. Madison closed her laptop and walked to the window. Somewhere in that galaxy of lights was Daniel Brooks, the janitor who had saved her life with engineering knowledge he shouldn't have possessed. A puzzle piece that didn't fit, and Madison Hale had never been able to leave a puzzle unsolved. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Hale mansion, transforming the marble entryway into a cathedral of light. Madison supervised the final preparations for that evening's Bachelor Selection Gala, her voice calm but authoritative as she directed the staff. The floral arrangements for the center tables need to be lowered, she instructed. Guests should be able to see each other across the table. Her event coordinator nodded, making notes on her tablet. The catering team wants to confirm the timing for the main course. Should we serve before or after the bachelor introductions? After, Madison decided. People make better decisions on a full stomach. She glanced around the grand space, a home she rarely used except for entertaining. The penthouse downtown was where she and Chloe actually lived, but the mansion in the Hamptons served as Hale Development's unofficial showcase venue. Tonight, 200 of New York's wealthiest and most influential people would gather here, ostensibly to help Madison find a suitable partner, but really to network, be seen, and feel virtuous about their charitable donations. Mom? Chloe's voice came from the sweeping staircase. Is Mr. Daniel coming to the party? Madison turned, surprised by the question. Mr. Brooks? No, sweetheart. He's not on the guest list. Chloe frowned, descending the stairs in her school uniform, backpack slung over one shoulder. But he saved us. Shouldn't he get to come to parties too? It's not that simple, Madison began, then paused, seeing the genuine confusion in her daughter's eyes. How did you explain social strata to a child who still believed in fundamental fairness? The party tonight is for potential friends for Mommy, she tried again. Mr. Brooks was just doing his job when he helped us. But he did it really well, Chloe persisted. Better than anyone else could have. And you said we should always recognize excellence. Madison smiled despite herself. I did say that, didn't I? But tonight's event was organized weeks ago, and Mr. Brooks probably has other plans. Chloe didn't look convinced, but the arrival of her nanny for the drive to school forestalled further discussion. As Madison kissed her daughter goodbye, she couldn't shake the feeling that Chloe had raised a valid point, one that highlighted the arbitrary nature of the social divisions Madison normally navigated without question. Her phone rang, Nora, her assistant, calling with the day's crisis. The engineers have submitted the revised timeline for Riverton, Nora reported. With the foundation redesign, we're looking at a 3-month delay minimum, and the budget increase is now projected at $4.2 million. Madison's mood darkened. Unacceptable. Schedule a meeting with the engineering team for this afternoon. I want to review every assumption they're making. Already done. 3 o'clock at the office. Nora hesitated. Also, Richard Evans called again. He wants to confirm he's still your escort for tonight's event. Madison suppressed a sigh. Richard, board member, major investor, and persistent suitor, had been angling for months to transition their professional relationship into something more personal. He was handsome, wealthy, and connected, a perfect match on paper. Yet something about his calculated interest left Madison cold. "Confirm it," she said finally, "but make it clear that he's accompanying me as a colleague, not a bachelor candidate." As she ended the call, Madison's thoughts returned to the Riverton project. The foundation issues threaten not just the timeline but the entire vision. Affordable housing integrated with market-rate units in commercial spaces, all designed to revitalize the neighborhood without displacing its current residents. It was the kind of project her father would have championed. William Hale had built the company on the principle that development should serve communities, not just investors. In the 5 years since his death, Madison had fought a constant battle to maintain that vision against board members who saw only profit margins. Riverton was supposed to be her statement project, proof that her father's approach could still work in today's market. Now it was in jeopardy, and she couldn't shake the feeling that conventional solutions weren't going to save it. The engineering meeting that afternoon went exactly as Madison had feared. Slide after slide of technical explanations for why the original foundation design wouldn't work with the soil conditions they'd encountered, why the redesign would take months, why the additional costs were unavoidable. "So you're telling me," Madison summarized, "that we have no choice but to delay housing for families who need it and absorb costs that will make similar projects impossible in the future?" The lead engineer, a competent but unimaginative man named Thomas, spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. "The soil conditions are what they are, Miss Hale. We can't change geology." "No, but we can adapt to it," Madison countered. "There must be alternative approaches we haven't considered." Thomas exchanged glances with his team. "We've explored all the standard options for this type of development. The redesign represents the most practical solution given the constraints." Standard options. The phrase stuck in Madison's mind as she ended the meeting without resolution. Standard thinking was what had created the housing crisis in the first place. Developers following the same playbook decade after decade, building for profit rather than people. She needed non-standard thinking. She needed someone who could see beyond conventional approaches. As Madison walked back to her office, she passed a maintenance closet. The door was ajar, and inside she glimpsed a familiar figure in a gray uniform, organizing cleaning supplies with the same methodical precision she'd seen during the elevator rescue. She stopped, a half-formed idea taking shape. "Mr. Brooks?" Daniel looked up, surprise crossing his face before he schooled his expression. "Ms. Hale, can I help you with something?" "Possibly." Madison glanced around the hallway, then lowered her voice. "The way you handled the elevator situation showed technical knowledge that isn't typical for a janitor?" Daniel supplied, his tone neutral rather than offended. "For maintenance staff," Madison amended. "May I ask what you did before joining Hale Development?" Daniel hesitated, caution evident in his stance. "I worked in construction, various roles." It wasn't the whole story, Madison was certain of that, but she didn't need his life history, just his expertise. "I have a project with foundation issues," she said directly. "Significant ones that are threatening both the timeline and budget. Would you be willing to look at the plans? Unofficially?" Daniel's expression shifted from caution to surprise, then back to careful neutrality. "With all due respect, Ms. Hale, I'm not sure that would be appropriate. I'm maintenance staff." "You're someone who might have a fresh perspective," Madison countered. "And right now, that's exactly what I need." Their eyes met in a moment of assessment, CEO and janitor, each taking the measure of the other outside the usual boundaries of their roles. "When?" Daniel asked finally. "Tonight," Madison decided. "Can you come to my office at 8? The building will be quiet and we can review the plans without interruption." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'll need to arrange childcare, but yes, I can be there." "Good." Madison turned to go, then paused. "And Mr. Brooks, thank you." As she walked away, Madison was aware she'd just done something unusual, perhaps even inappropriate by corporate standards. CEOs didn't normally consult maintenance staff on multi-million-dollar engineering challenges, but conventional approaches weren't solving her problem, and there was something about Daniel Brooks that suggested he was far more than his current job title indicated. At 7:55 that evening, Daniel stood outside Madison Hale's office, wearing the same janitor's uniform he'd worn all day. He considered changing into civilian clothes but decided against it. This meeting was unusual enough without blurring the lines further by pretending to be something he wasn't. He'd called Mrs. Ferris to watch Ethan, promising to be home by 10. He told her it was overtime work, which wasn't entirely a lie. What he hadn't explained was why the CEO of Hale Development wanted a janitor's opinion on a major project. He wasn't entirely sure himself. The door opened and Madison appeared, still in her business attire from the day, a tailored suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, but worn with the unconscious ease of someone who didn't think about such things. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming." She stepped aside to let him enter. "Please come in." The office was exactly what he'd expected. Spacious, elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. What surprised him was the mess of blueprints and reports spread across the conference table, evidence of long hours spent searching for solutions. "The Riverton Project," Madison explained, gesturing to the papers. "Mixed-use development in the East Side neighborhood. Affordable housing, community spaces, commercial areas, all designed to revitalize without gentrifying." Daniel nodded, recognizing the area. "That's an ambitious goal in today's market." "It's a necessary one." Madison's voice took on an edge of passion that hadn't been present during their previous interactions. "Development shouldn't mean displacement. Communities need investment that serves existing residents, not just those who can afford luxury condos." It was a perspective Daniel hadn't expected from someone in her position. Most developers he'd known viewed affordable housing as an obligation to be minimized, not a mission to be championed. "The problem," Madison continued, "is that we've encountered unstable soil conditions that weren't identified in the initial surveys. The engineering team wants to completely redesign the foundation, adding months to the timeline and millions to the budget." Daniel moved to the table, eyes scanning the blueprints with practiced efficiency. "May I?" Madison nodded, and Daniel began examining the plans in detail, focusing first on the soil reports, then the foundation design, then the structural load calculations. His hands moved across the papers with the sure touch of someone who'd read thousands of such documents, pausing occasionally to make mental notes. Madison watched him work, struck by the transformation. Gone was the deferent maintenance worker. In his place was someone who clearly understood exactly what he was looking at, who could read the complex technical language of engineering as fluently as she read financial statements. After several minutes of silent review, Daniel looked up. "The problem isn't just the soil variability, it's that they're trying to use a standard spread footing system across the entire site, as if the soil were uniform." Madison moved closer. "And it's not?" "Not even close." Daniel pointed to sections of the geological survey. "You've got clay pockets here, sandy loam here, and what looks like old riverbed deposits in this section. A one-size-fits-all foundation will never work." "So the engineers are right about the redesign?" "They're right about the problem, wrong about the solution." Daniel reached for a pencil and a blank sheet of paper. "What you need is a micropile system with varying depths and load capacities calibrated to the specific soil conditions in each section." His hand moved quickly, sketching a cross-section of what he was describing. The drawing was precise, confident, the work of someone who'd done this hundreds of times before. "Micropiles are essentially slender columns that transfer the load to stable soil or bedrock," he explained. "By varying their depth and configuration based on the soil profile at each location, you can create a foundation system that accommodates the variability instead of fighting against it." Madison studied the sketch, impressed despite her limited technical knowledge. "And this would work for a project of Riverton's scale?" "Absolutely. I've used similar approaches on—" Daniel caught himself, then continued more carefully. "I've seen this approach used successfully on projects with even more challenging soil conditions." Madison didn't miss the slip, but she let it pass. "What about the timeline and cost implications?" "You'd save time overall, even with the redesign," Daniel replied. The micropile installation is faster than conventional foundations, especially in variable soils. And while the materials cost might be slightly higher, you'd save on labor and avoid the 3-month delay your engineers are projecting. Madison felt a surge of hope for the first time since receiving the troubling soil reports. This sounds promising, but why wouldn't our engineering team have suggested it? Daniel considered his answer carefully. Most engineers stick with what they know works. Micropile systems are less common in residential construction. They're typically used more in commercial projects or in areas with known soil challenges. Your team probably defaulted to conventional solutions because that's their standard approach. Madison nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his assessment. Standard approaches, standard thinking, exactly what she'd been pushing against. "Mr. Brooks," she said, studying him with new interest, "you're clearly more than a maintenance worker. Your understanding of structural engineering is professional." Daniel's expression closed slightly. "I've had some experience in the field." Clearly, Madison decided to press. "Why are you working as a janitor at Hale Development when you have this level of expertise?" The question hung between them, direct, unavoidable. Daniel seemed to weigh his options before responding. "Career paths aren't always linear," he said finally. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns." It wasn't a real answer, but Madison recognized the boundary he was establishing. She respected it, for now. "I'd like you to present this micropile concept to our engineering team," she said instead. "As a consultant." Daniel's eyes widened. "That would be complicated." "I'll handle the complications," Madison replied. "Riverton matters too much to let conventional thinking derail it. You have a solution that could save the project. I want that solution implemented." Daniel hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. "I appreciate the opportunity, Miss Hale, but my situation is, I have responsibilities that make taking on additional roles difficult." "Your son," Madison said, remembering the emergency contact information. "Ethan, right?" Daniel nodded, surprise flickering across his face that she would know or remember this detail. "We can work around your schedule," Madison assured him. "Part-time consulting hours, no impact on your current position, and of course, appropriate compensation for your expertise." The offer hung between them, a bridge between worlds that weren't supposed to intersect this way. Daniel studied Madison's face, looking for the calculation, the angle, the hidden agenda that must surely be there. But all he saw was determination and something that looked remarkably like respect. "I'll need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course." Madison handed him a business card with her private number written on the back. "Let me know by tomorrow evening. The Riverton timeline won't wait." As Daniel left the office, blueprints and sketches still spread across the conference table behind him, he felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and dread. The chance to use his engineering skills again, to build rather than just maintain, pulled at something he'd tried to bury for years. But stepping back into that world, even tangentially, meant risking exposure of his past. The collapse, the investigation, the surrender of his license. It meant making himself visible again. And visibility had cost him nearly everything once before. The Bachelor Selection Gala was in full swing when Madison arrived, fashionably late with Richard Evans at her side. The mansion gleamed with polished surfaces and strategic lighting, making everything and everyone look their most flattering. Waiters circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played tasteful background music. "You've outdone yourself," Richard commented, surveying the scene with approval. "The society pages will be talking about this for weeks." Madison smiled politely, though her mind was still partially occupied with micropiles and soil conditions. "Claire deserves the credit. She organized everything. But it's your star power that brought out this crowd." Richard gestured to the assembled guests, Manhattan's elite dressed in their finest and clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Everyone wants to see who Madison Hale might choose." The comment grated slightly. The selection concept had been promoted as lighthearted fun for charity, but Madison was beginning to regret the entire premise. It reduced something as complex as partnership to a pageant, all while pretending not to take itself seriously. "It's just a fundraiser, Richard," she reminded him. "No actual selections will be made tonight." He laughed as if she'd said something charming. Of course, but you can't blame a man for hoping he might stand out from the crowd. Before Madison could respond, Claire appeared, resplendent in emerald green and practically vibrating with event planner energy. There you are. Perfect timing. We're about to begin the introductions. The bachelors are all in position. She lowered her voice to a stage whisper. And they're gorgeous. I've outdone myself. Madison allowed herself to be guided toward the grand staircase, where she would stand as 5 carefully selected bachelors were presented to the crowd. It was theatrical and ridiculous, but it had already raised over $500,000 for youth programs. So she played her role. The candidates were exactly what she'd expected. Successful, attractive men with the right credentials and connections. A surgeon who served on hospital boards. A tech entrepreneur with a social conscience. A finance executive who funded arts programs. An architect known for sustainable design. And of course, Richard, who wasn't officially part of the lineup but had made sure everyone knew he considered himself the frontrunner. As Madison stood on the staircase, smiling and nodding, as each man was introduced with a carefully crafted biography highlighting his professional accomplishments and charitable interests, she couldn't help but feel the artificiality of it all. These men were being presented like products, their value measured in credentials and connections rather than character. Her gaze drifted to the perimeter of the room where the staff worked invisibly to keep the event running smoothly. And there, near a service entrance, was a familiar figure in a gray uniform with Daniel stitched above the pocket. Madison blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected to see him here, hadn't even considered that he might be part of the maintenance staff assigned to the mansion for events. Yet there he was, collecting empty glasses from a side table, his movements efficient and unobtrusive as he navigated the crowd of people who looked through him rather than at him. The contrast was stark. Here were 5 men being celebrated for their eligibility, their worth broadcast to a room full of admiring onlookers. And there was Daniel Brooks, a man who had saved her life and might now save her most important project, invisible to everyone but her. Claire's voice cut through Madison's thoughts. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for. Madison will say a few words about what she's looking for in a partner, and then we'll open the floor for mingling and generous donations to our youth programs. Madison stepped forward, prepared to deliver her rehearsed remarks about companionship and shared values. But as she looked out over the expectant crowd, her eyes caught Daniel's for a brief moment. Something in that connection, CEO and janitor, visible and invisible, both out of place in their current roles, shifted her perspective. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. "Your generosity will make a real difference in the lives of young people across our city." The crowd applauded politely, champagne glasses glinting in the chandelier light. "I'm supposed to talk about what I'm looking for in a partner," Madison continued, "the qualities that matter most to me. But standing here, I realize that those qualities aren't easily summarized in a biography or a resume." She could see Claire's slight frown of confusion. This wasn't the script. "What matters to me," Madison said, her voice growing stronger, "isn't titles or credentials. It's integrity, problem solving, the ability to see solutions where others see only obstacles, the willingness to do what's right, even when it's difficult." Her eyes found Daniel again. He had paused in his work, listening like everyone else, though he couldn't know her words were shaped partly by her recent insights into who he might really be. "I believe true worth isn't measured by the accolades we accumulate or the circles we move in," Madison continued. "It's measured by what we build that lasts, relationships, communities, trust, by how we handle both success and setbacks, by whether we lift others up or simply elevate ourselves." The room had grown quiet, the light conversation stilled, as guests sensed this was more than perfunctory remarks. "So while I'm grateful to meet the accomplished gentlemen presented tonight, I want to be clear, I'm not actually selecting a partner from a lineup, however impressive that lineup might be. Real connections don't work that way. They form unexpectedly, often with people who challenge our assumptions and expand our perspectives." Madison finished with a smile that softened the mild rebuke contained in her words. "Now please enjoy the evening, get to know each other, and remember that every dollar donated tonight helps build a future for young people who deserve the same opportunities we've had." As applause filled the room and the string quartet resumed playing, Madison descended the stairs. Claire intercepted her immediately. "That was not what we rehearsed," she said, keeping her smile firmly in place for the benefit of nearby guests. "It was more honest," Madison replied. "Honesty is overrated at fundraisers," Claire muttered. "But you pulled it off. The crowd loved it. They think you're refreshingly authentic." Madison laughed. "Then everyone wins." As the evening progressed, Madison circulated as expected, chatting with donors and posing for photos. The bachelors received plenty of attention, with good-natured bidding taking place for dance lessons with the surgeon or a private gallery tour with the architect. The event was a success by every measurable standard. But Madison's attention kept returning to the edges of the room, tracking the gray uniform as it moved efficiently through spaces designed to render it invisible. She noticed how Daniel interacted respectfully but minimally with guests, how he anticipated needs before they were expressed, how he quietly fixed small problems, a wobbly table, a stuck door, without drawing attention to himself. It was near the end of the evening when Chloe made her dramatic entrance. Madison had assumed her daughter was asleep upstairs with her nanny, but apparently Chloe had other plans. She appeared at the top of the grand staircase in her favorite address, hair brushed and ribbon adorned, clearly having prepared for a public appearance. "Excuse me," she called, her clear child's voice cutting through the adult conversation. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" The room quieted, guests turning with indulgent smiles toward the precocious child. Madison started toward the stairs, equal parts amused and mortified by her daughter's impromptu speech. "My mom said she's looking for someone who fixes problems and builds things that last," Chloe announced. "But I think she missed the most obvious candidate." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, the charming antics of a child at an adult gathering. But Chloe wasn't finished. "Mr. Daniel," she called, pointing directly at the janitor who was attempting to blend into the wall near a service entrance. "He's right there." The room went silent. All eyes turned toward Daniel, who stood frozen, cleaning cloth in hand, caught in the sudden, unexpected spotlight. "He saved our lives when the elevator broke," Chloe continued, her voice ringing with the absolute certainty of childhood. "He knew exactly what to do when everyone else was scared. That's way more impressive than owning a company or being on a board." Madison reached the bottom of the stairs, caught between embarrassment at the social disruption and pride in her daughter's uncanny ability to cut through pretense. "Chloe, sweetheart," she began, "this isn't the time for—" "But Mom, you always say we should recognize excellence when we see it," Chloe persisted, descending the stairs with deliberate steps. "Mr. Daniel showed excellence. Why isn't he one of the candidates?" The question, innocent, direct, unanswerable, hung in the air. Richard Evans was the first to recover, stepping forward with a practiced chuckle. "Children say the most unexpected things, don't they?" he said, attempting to defuse the moment with adult condescension. But Chloe wasn't having it. She walked directly to Daniel, who looked like he wished the floor would open and swallow him whole. "My mom needs someone who can fix things," she said, looking up at him with earnest eyes, "and you're the best fixer I've ever seen." Daniel knelt to her level, his voice gentle but firm. "That's very kind of you to say, Chloe, but your mom needs someone who fits into her world. I have my own world to take care of." "Why can't the worlds mix?" Chloe asked, the simple question containing a depth of social philosophy beyond her years. Before Daniel could answer, Madison joined them, aware of the room's attention, but focused on handling the moment with grace. "Chloe, it's past your bedtime," she said gently, "and I think we've put Mr. Brooks on the spot enough for one evening." She turned to Daniel, offering an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about this." "No need to apologize," Daniel replied, rising to his feet. "She meant it as a compliment." "The highest compliment," Madison agreed. Then to the room at large, she added, "My daughter has a talent for recognizing capability, regardless of title or position. It's a quality I try to emulate." The smooth response allowed the moment to pass. Conversation resumed, the string quartet played on, and the social machinery recalibrated to absorb the minor disruption. Chloe was led upstairs by her nanny, waving to Daniel as she went, while Madison returned to her duties as hostess. But something had shifted in the room's atmosphere. The neat categories of who belonged where had been momentarily disrupted by a child's innocent question. And more than one guest found themselves looking at the service staff with new awareness, wondering about the invisible lives that maintain their visible world. Daniel resumed his duties, face carefully neutral, though his mind was racing. He hadn't expected to be thrust into the spotlight, hadn't wanted it, yet Chloe's words had stirred something in him he'd thought long buried. Pride, recognition, the acknowledgement of worth beyond his current station. As the event wound down and guests began to depart, Madison found herself standing near the service entrance where staff were clearing the last of the glasses and plates. She spotted Daniel directing the cleanup with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown throughout the evening. "Mr. Brooks," she said, approaching him, "a word if you don't mind?" He followed her to a quiet alcove away from the remaining guests. "Ms. Hale, I want to apologize for being put in that position. I had no idea your daughter would—" "No apology necessary," Madison interrupted. "Chloe has a mind of her own, always has." "She's a remarkable child," Daniel said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Yes, she is." Madison paused, then added, "And she wasn't wrong about what she said." Daniel looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "Have you considered my offer?" Madison asked. "About consulting on the Riverton project?" The question seemed to bring Daniel back to reality. "I have, and I've decided to accept, with conditions." "Which are?" "I work as a consultant only, not an employee. My name stays off official documents. I maintain my regular maintenance job and schedule, and—" He hesitated, then finished firmly, "My son's needs come first. If there's ever a conflict, Ethan is my priority." Madison nodded. "Those terms are acceptable. We can draw up a consultant agreement tomorrow." "One more thing," Daniel added. "Why me? You have access to top engineering firms, experts with current credentials and reputations. Why turn to a janitor with a mysterious past?" Madison considered the question carefully. "Because sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from unexpected places. Because you saw a solution where others saw only problems. And because I suspect there's more to your story than you're ready to share." She extended her hand. "I don't need to know all of it. I just need your expertise on Riverton. The rest is your business." Daniel studied her for a moment, then shook her hand. The gesture felt different than their previous handshakes, less defined by their respective positions, more by the unusual alliance they were forming. "I'll do my best for the project," he said simply. "I know you will." Madison smiled. "After all, you're the best fixer my daughter has ever seen." As Daniel left the mansion that night, making his way to the subway that would take him back to his modest apartment where Mrs. Ferris waited with Ethan, he felt a strange mixture of anticipation and apprehension. The offer represented a chance to use his skills again, to build rather than just maintain, but it also meant stepping out of the shadows he'd carefully constructed around himself since Morgan Tower. The subway car rocked gently as it carried him away from the world of crystal chandeliers and champagne flutes, back toward worn furniture and second-hand textbooks. Daniel closed his eyes, remembering the look on Chloe's face as she'd pointed him out in that crowded room. The absolute certainty that he belonged among the candidates rather than the service staff. Children saw things differently. They hadn't yet learned the complex social coding that sorted people into hierarchies of worth based on clothes and titles. To Chloe, he was simply the man who had fixed a dangerous problem when no one else could. Perhaps, Daniel thought as the subway rumbled beneath Manhattan, it was time to start fixing bigger things again. What he didn't yet realize was that the foundations he would help build at Riverton would support far more than physical structures. They would become the platform for a future neither he nor Madison could yet imagine. One where the invisible became visible, where worlds could indeed mix, and where a janitor and a CEO might find they weren't so different after all. But first, there were micropiles to design, soil conditions to address, and a project to save. The real work was just beginning. The Riverton construction site sprawled across 3 city blocks, a skeleton of steel and concrete slowly taking shape against the morning sky. Yellow machinery dotted the landscape like prehistoric beasts, their diesel engines growling as they moved earth and materials. Workers in hard hats swarmed the site, an organized chaos of human industry. Daniel stood at the edge of the excavation, work boots planted firmly on soil he now understood intimately. The geological survey report was tucked under his arm, dog-eared and marked with his notes. He wore jeans and a plain button-down shirt, not his janitor or his uniform, but not the designer casual wear favored by the project's engineers either. A deliberate middle ground for his ambiguous new role. 2 weeks had passed since Madison Hale had offered him the consulting position. 2 weeks of early mornings reviewing plans before his maintenance shift, late nights calculating load distributions at his kitchen table while Ethan slept, weekends spent walking the Riverton site while his son played nearby, absorbing the physical reality of what the papers described in theory. The micropile foundation system he'd designed was innovative but sound. He'd staked his professional judgment on it, the only currency he had left from his engineering days. Now it was time to present it to people who would question not just the design, but his right to propose it. "Ready for this?" Madison asked, joining him at the edge of the excavation. She wore tailored slacks and a silk blouse, her concession to the construction site a pair of expensive boots that somehow managed to look both practical and fashionable. "As ready as I'll ever be," Daniel replied, his eyes still on the site. "They won't make this easy." "I don't expect them to," Madison said, "but the math and science are on our side. The micropile system works. They just need to get past who designed it." Daniel nodded, appreciating her directness. In their brief professional association, he'd come to value Madison's lack of pretense in private conversations. She didn't sugarcoat challenges or offer empty reassurances. She acknowledged reality and then found ways to reshape it. "Let's get this over with," he said, turning toward the site trailer where the project team waited. The trailer was crowded with the key players. Thomas Weber, the lead engineer whose conventional foundation design had failed. Paul Grayson, the site supervisor whose practical experience made him respected by the crews. Representatives from the construction company and the city's building department. And unexpectedly, Richard Evans. Madison's expression betrayed momentary surprise at Richard's presence, quickly masked by professional composure. "Richard, I didn't expect you at a technical review meeting." Richard smiled, smooth as polished marble. "As the board's representative for the Riverton project, I thought I should be present for such a significant design change." His gaze slid to Daniel, assessment in his eyes. "Especially given the unconventional nature of the new consultant." The emphasis on consultant carried clear meaning. "You don't belong here." Daniel felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the automatic physical response to having his competence questioned. But his face remained neutral, a skill honed through years of invisible work. Madison made the introductions with deliberate formality. "For those who haven't met him, this is Daniel Brooks, our technical consultant on the foundation redesign. Mr. Brooks has extensive experience with variable soil conditions and micropile systems." Thomas Weber frowned. "I wasn't aware we'd brought in an outside consultant. My team has been working on a conventional redesign that would add 3 months to the timeline and millions to the budget," Madison finished. "Which is why I sought alternative approaches. Mr. Brooks has developed a solution that addresses the soil variability directly rather than trying to overcome it with brute force." Daniel stepped forward, unrolling the detailed plans he'd prepared. As he began to explain the micropile system, he felt the room's skepticism like a physical weight. But this, the technical explanation, the math, the physics, was where he lived, where he belonged, regardless of his current job title. "The conventional approach treats soil as a uniform medium," he explained, his voice gaining confidence as he moved into familiar territory. "But Riverton's geology is anything but uniform. We've got clay pockets here, sandy loam here, and old riverbed deposits throughout this section." He pointed to specific areas on the soil survey. "Standard spread footings fight against this variability. Micropiles work with it." Thomas crossed his arms. "Micropiles are typically used for smaller structures or retrofit situations. This is a major development with significant vertical loads." "That used to be true," Daniel acknowledged, "but the technology and installation methods have advanced considerably. The system I'm proposing uses variable depth piles calibrated to the specific soil conditions at each location." He unrolled a second set of drawings, cross-sections showing the detailed pile configurations. Each pile transfers load to the most stable soil layer or bedrock beneath its position. The result is a foundation that accommodates soil variability rather than trying to overcome it. As Daniel continued, explaining the technical specifications, load calculations, and installation methodology, he could see the shift in the room. The engineers leaned closer, their expressions moving from skepticism to consideration. Paul, the site supervisor, studied the installation details with particular interest. This would be faster to implement than a complete redesign, Paul observed, asking the practical questions that engineers sometimes overlooked. What about equipment requirements? Crew specialization? Daniel answered each question directly, his knowledge of construction realities evident in his responses. He wasn't just an engineer who understood theory, he was someone who knew how things actually got built. Throughout the presentation, Richard remained silent, watching with calculating eyes. His gaze moved between Daniel and Madison, noting their easy professional rapport, the mutual respect evident in their interactions. When the technical questions were exhausted, Richard finally spoke. This is all very innovative, Brooks, was it? But I'm curious about your background. Where did you develop this expertise in micropile systems? The question hung in the air, the one Daniel had been expecting but hoping to avoid. Madison stepped in smoothly. Mr. Brooks's qualifications have been thoroughly reviewed as part of his consulting agreement. His expertise is evident in the design itself, which has been verified by our structural team. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Of course, but for a project of this significance, the board would be reassured to know more about the consultant's professional history, previous projects, credentials, that sort of thing. Daniel met Richard's gaze directly. I've worked on 18 major projects involving deep foundation systems in variable soil conditions. The Westridge Commercial Center, 3 blocks from here, used a similar approach, though with earlier generation technology. Richard raised an eyebrow. Westridge was completed 6 years ago, if I recall correctly. And you were with Whitfield and Brooks Engineering, Daniel replied, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. I was the lead structural engineer. A flicker of recognition crossed Richard's face. Whitfield and Brooks, wasn't that the firm involved in the Morgan Tower incident? And there it was, the connection Daniel had known would eventually surface. The room grew quiet, the atmosphere shifting from technical assessment to something more personal. It was, Daniel acknowledged, his voice level. The partial collapse occurred under my supervision. I accepted full responsibility for the structural failures. Thomas Weber stiffened. Morgan Tower? 3 workers were injured in that collapse. There were serious code violations. I'm well aware, Daniel replied, the words like ashes in his mouth. No one regrets what happened more than I do. Madison intervened before the conversation could derail further. Mr. Brooks's past projects, both successful and problematic, have informed his current expertise. The micropile design has been thoroughly vetted and stands on its own merits. If there are no further technical questions, I suggest we move to implementation planning. Her firm redirection worked, pulling the meeting back to the task at hand. But Daniel could see in Richard's satisfied expression that the seed had been planted. Morgan Tower was now part of the Riverton conversation. As the meeting concluded and the team dispersed, Richard lingered, approaching Madison with practiced casualness. A word, if you don't mind, he said, guiding her slightly away from Daniel. His voice was lowered but still audible in the small trailer. Madison, I'm concerned about the risk here. Bringing in a consultant with this background, changing fundamental design elements mid-project, the board will have questions. Madison's reply was equally measured. The board is welcome to review the technical documentation. The micropile system is sound, and it saves both time and money without compromising safety. It's not just about the technical aspects, Richard pressed. It's about judgment, about who we trust with a project of this importance. Daniel busied himself gathering his drawings, pretending not to hear but acutely aware of every word. This was the real objection. Not to his design, but to him. My judgment is to pursue the best solution regardless of its source, Madison replied, an edge entering her voice. Daniel Brooks has provided that solution. His past doesn't change the validity of his engineering. Richard's smile tightened. The board may see things differently. We'll discuss it at Thursday's meeting. He turned, nodding cordially to Daniel before exiting the trailer. Mr. Brooks, fascinating presentation. When the door closed behind him, Madison let out a slow breath. Well, that went about as expected. He'll dig into Morgan Tower, Daniel said, stating the obvious. He'll use it to discredit the design and you for bringing me in. Madison's eyes met his, direct and unflinching. Then we'd better make sure the micropiles are already being installed by Thursday's board meeting. Easier to ask forgiveness than permission, especially when the solution is already proving itself. Daniel stared at her, surprised by the boldness of the strategy. You'd start implementation before board approval? I have discretionary authority for design modifications within certain parameters, Madison replied. The cost savings of your approach keeps us within those parameters, technically. A smile tugged at the corner of Daniel's mouth despite the tension. Technically is good enough in engineering. And in business, Madison agreed. She turned to Paul, who had been quietly observing the exchange. How quickly can we begin micropile installation? The site supervisor considered. I can have a specialized crew here by tomorrow. First piles could be going in by afternoon. Do it, Madison decided. I'll handle the paperwork and the politics. As they left the trailer, Daniel felt a mixture of admiration and concern. Madison was taking a significant professional risk by backing his design so decisively. If anything went wrong, if the micropiles didn't perform as projected, she would bear the consequences alongside him. You don't have to stake your reputation on this, he said quietly as they walked back toward the site entrance. We could wait for board approval, do more testing. Every day of delay costs money and pushes back completion, Madison replied. Families are waiting for these homes, Daniel. The community has already waited too long for investment that serves their needs rather than displacing them. She paused, looking out over the construction site. Besides, I trust your design, and I trust my judgment in bringing you onto this project, regardless of what Richard thinks. Daniel studied her profile, struck by the conviction in her voice. Madison Hale was not what he'd expected from a CEO of a major development company. The easy assumption would have been ambition without conscience, profit over people. But at every turn, she revealed a deeper motivation, a commitment to her father's vision of development that served communities rather than exploiting them. Thank you, he said simply, for the opportunity and the trust. Madison turned to him, her expression softening slightly. Thank you for providing a solution when everyone else saw only problems. That's rare in any profession. The moment stretched between them, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect that transcended their different positions. Then Madison glanced at her watch, professional mode reasserting itself. I've got a meeting downtown in 30 minutes. You'll coordinate with Paul on the installation details? Daniel nodded. I'll be here for the initial setup tomorrow, then check in during my lunch break. My maintenance shift starts at 2. Madison hesitated. About that, would you consider taking a leave from your maintenance duties while this project is underway? We could structure the consulting fee to compensate for the difference. The offer was tempting. A chance to focus solely on engineering again, to shed the janitor's uniform even temporarily. But Daniel shook his head. Better to keep things as they are for now, less complicated. What he didn't say was that the maintenance job was safe, known, a stable foundation for Ethan's life that Daniel was reluctant to disrupt based on a temporary consulting arrangement that could end as quickly as it began. Madison seemed to understand the unspoken reasoning. As you wish, but the offer remains open if you change your mind. As she walked toward her car, phone already in hand to manage the next crisis in her packed schedule, Daniel remained at the edge of the excavation, looking out over what would eventually be homes for hundreds of families. For the first time in years, he was building again, not just maintaining, creating, not just cleaning up. It felt right in a way nothing had since Morgan Tower, and terrifying for exactly the same reason. The first week of micropile installation proceeded better than even Daniel had hoped. The specialized crews worked efficiently, the geological conditions matched the survey data, and the real-time load test confirmed his calculations. By Wednesday afternoon, enough of the system was in place to demonstrate its effectiveness to anyone who understood foundation engineering. Daniel split his time between his regular maintenance duties at Hale Tower and his consulting role at Riverton, changing clothes in his car as he moved between worlds. The practical logistics were exhausting, but the mental stimulation of the engineering work energized him in ways he'd almost forgotten. Ethan had noticed the change in his father, the animated dinner conversations about soil conditions and load transfers, the technical sketches that once again covered the kitchen table, the extra light in his eyes when he talked about his day. "Are you going back to being an engineer, Dad?" Ethan asked one evening as they walked home from his school, the fall air crisp around them. Daniel looked down at his son, weighing honesty against protection. "Not exactly. I'm helping with one project, using what I know about buildings, but my regular job is still at Hale Tower." Ethan kicked at a pebble on the sidewalk. "Tommy's dad says engineers make a lot of money, more than janitors." The comment stung, though Daniel kept his expression neutral. "That's often true, but money isn't the only way to measure a job's worth." "I know," Ethan said quickly. "I just meant you seem happier when you're talking about the building project." Daniel stopped walking, turning to face his son. "I enjoy using those skills again, but being your dad, making sure we have a stable life, that's still my most important job. Nothing changes that." Ethan studied his father's face with the serious contemplation that sometimes made him seem older than his 8 years. "I think you could do both, be an engineer again and still be my dad." "Maybe someday," Daniel replied, ruffling Ethan's hair. "For now, let's focus on getting your science project finished before the weekend. How's that earthquake-resistant building coming along?" As they continued walking, discussing the merits of different base isolation systems for Ethan's model, Daniel considered his son's observation. He was happier working on Riverton. The engineering challenges engaged his mind in ways that maintenance work never could. But the path back to his former profession was complicated by more than just practical considerations. Morgan Tower still cast its shadow. And now that Richard Evans was aware of the connection, that shadow threatened to extend over Riverton as well. The Hale Development boardroom projected power through understated elegance. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan's skyline. Around that table sat 9 people whose decisions shaped the city's physical landscape. The board of directors, with Madison at its head. "The Riverton Foundation modifications are already underway," Madison explained, her presentation slides showing the micropile installation in progress. "The new system accommodates the variable soil conditions directly, saving both time and money compared to a conventional redesign." She clicked to the next slide, a chart comparing the original timeline to the revised one. "We've eliminated the 3-month delay projected under the previous approach. The foundation system will be completed within the original schedule parameters." Another slide, a budget comparison. "Material costs are slightly higher for the micropiles, but we're saving substantially on labor and avoiding the significant carrying costs of an extended timeline. Net result, we're back within the original budget envelope." The board members' expressions ranged from impressed to skeptical. Patricia Winters, the longest-serving member, leaned forward with interest. "This is remarkably good news, Madison. What prompted the exploration of this alternative approach?" Before Madison could answer, Richard interjected smoothly. "That's actually a point I wanted to address." He slid folders toward each board member. "Madison has brought in an unusual consultant for this critical design modification." The folders contained a neatly assembled dossier. News articles about the Morgan Tower collapse, investigation findings, license suspension records, and a professional history of Daniel Brooks that ended abruptly 6 years earlier. "Daniel Brooks was the engineer responsible for the Morgan Tower failure," Richard continued, his tone suggesting reasonable concern rather than accusation. 3 workers were injured. Serious code violations were identified. His professional license was suspended indefinitely. He turned to Madison. "And now he's designing the foundation for our largest affordable housing project, a project where safety cannot be compromised." The room fell silent as board members reviewed the materials. Madison remained composed, though a muscle in her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Daniel Brooks is currently employed as a maintenance worker at Hale Tower," Richard added, the final twist of the knife. "A janitor designing our foundation system. One has to question the judgment involved in this decision." Madison allowed the uncomfortable silence to stretch for a moment before responding, her voice calm and measured. Everything in those folders is factually accurate. Mr. Brooks was indeed the engineer of record on Morgan Tower. He did accept responsibility for the structural failures, and he is currently employed in our maintenance department. She stood, moving to the presentation screen. What those folders don't contain is the detailed technical analysis of the micropile system he designed for Riverton, a system that has been independently verified by our engineering team and is already demonstrating excellent performance in field testing. She clicked to a new slide, real-time monitoring data from the partially installed system. These are the settlement measurements from the first 3 days of installation. As you can see, they're within 0.8 millimeters of the projected values, well below even the most conservative threshold for concern. Patricia Winters studied the data with a practiced eye. These results are impressive, regardless of who designed the system. But Richard raises a valid concern about Mr. Brooks's history. What assurances do we have that Morgan Tower won't repeat itself here? 3 specific assurances, Madison replied. First, the micropile design has been reviewed and approved by our full engineering team. Second, we've implemented continuous monitoring systems that track settlement patterns in real time, allowing for immediate intervention if any anomalies appear. And third, she paused, weighing her next words carefully. I've personally researched the Morgan Tower incident beyond the public record. There were complications in that case that don't appear in the investigation findings. Richard's eyes narrowed. What complications? Ones that don't change the official record, but do provide important context for assessing Mr. Brooks' actual culpability and current reliability. Madison replied, deliberately vague. I'm satisfied that his technical judgment is sound and his commitment to safety is absolute. She hadn't spoken directly with Daniel about what had really happened at Morgan Tower, about his partner's role in substituting inferior materials, about Daniel's choice to protect a family facing serious illness. That information had come through Madison's private investigator, hired to thoroughly vet Daniel before she'd brought him onto Riverton. But she'd kept that knowledge private, respecting the choice he'd made. This still represents an unnecessary risk, Richard argued. We have access to top engineering firms with impeccable records. Why stake the company's reputation on someone with this history? Madison returned to her seat, meeting Richard's gaze directly. Because his solution is better, faster, more cost-effective, and specifically tailored to our site conditions. The board hired me to make these kinds of judgment calls, to recognize exceptional solutions regardless of their source. She looked around the table, addressing each member in turn. Riverton isn't just another project. It's a statement about what Hale Development stands for. Building communities, not just buildings. Creating housing that serves existing residents, not just wealthy newcomers. My father founded this company on those principles. The mention of William Hale shifted the atmosphere subtly. Most of the board members had worked with him, respected his vision, even when they disagreed with his methods. Daniel Brooks has provided a solution that allows us to deliver on that vision, on schedule and within budget, Madison continued. I stand by the decision to implement it. The discussion continued for another hour. Technical questions, risk assessments, concerns about public perception if Daniel's background became known. Throughout, Madison defended her decision with calm conviction, presenting the facts without emotional appeals. In the end, the board voted 5-4 to continue with the micropile installation, with Patricia Winters casting the deciding vote. The results speak for themselves, Patricia said. But, she added, looking directly at Madison, the board expects regular updates on the monitoring data, and any anomalies must be reported immediately. Absolutely, Madison agreed. As the meeting adjourned, Richard lingered, his expression unreadable. Congratulations on your victory. It's not a victory, Richard. It's a practical business decision, Madison replied. The best solution won on its merits. Perhaps. His smile didn't reach his eyes. But I wonder about these complications you mentioned regarding Morgan Tower. Seems like there might be more to that story than appears in the public record. Madison met his gaze steadily. There often is. Indeed. Richard gathered his materials unhurriedly. Just remember, Madison, everyone has a past. Some are just better hidden than others. When the comment hung in the air between them, not quite a threat, but a reminder that Richard Evans hadn't built his fortune by accepting defeat gracefully. He would be watching, waiting for any sign that her judgment about Daniel Brooks had been flawed. As Madison left the boardroom, her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Micropile Section C complete. Load test perfect. Phase 2 starts tomorrow. She smiled at the simple professional update, feeling a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to ease. The project was proceeding, the board was cautiously on board, and the foundation, both literal and metaphorical, was proving solid. What she didn't yet know was that Richard Evans had already started laying the groundwork for a different kind of test. One designed not to validate the micropile system, but to break the man who had designed it. The Natural History Museum bustled with weekend visitors, families moving through the exhibits, children pointing excitedly at dinosaur skeletons and dioramas of ancient worlds. Among them were Daniel and Ethan, the latter clutching a notebook filled with observations for his science project. The T-Rex's skeleton shows how the weight distribution works with the tail as a counterbalance, Ethan explained seriously, making notes as he studied the massive fossil. It's like a building where the load has to be balanced. Daniel smiled at his son's analysis. That's exactly right. Nature figured out structural engineering long before humans did. Daniel, Ethan. A familiar voice cut through the museum's ambient noise. Daniel turned to see Madison approaching, Chloe at her side. Both were dressed casually, Madison in jeans and a sweater that transformed her from untouchable CEO to approachable mother, Chloe in a dinosaur print dress that suggested this wasn't her first visit to the exhibit. Ms. Hale, Daniel greeted, automatically shifting to the formal address he used at work. Hello, Chloe. Madison, please, she corrected. We're not at the office. Chloe had already moved to Ethan's side, peering at his notebook. Are you studying dinosaurs too? I'm doing a report on why the Triceratops had the best defensive design in the whole Cretaceous period. Ethan brightened at finding a kindred dinosaur enthusiast. I'm looking at how they balanced. The T-Rex had to have exactly the right posture or it would fall over. Like buildings, Chloe exclaimed. My mom says buildings have to be balanced too. The children fell into animated conversation, moving slightly ahead toward the next exhibit, leaving Daniel and Madison to follow. I'm sorry if we interrupted your day, Madison said. Chloe insisted on the dinosaur exhibit and no apology necessary, Daniel assured her. Ethan's gathering research for his science project on structural stability. Dinosaurs are perfect examples. They walked side by side, watching their children dart between exhibits, their excitement building as they discovered shared interests. How did the board meeting go? Daniel asked, lowering his voice. I'm assuming they didn't shut down the micropile installation since we're still proceeding. They approved continuing, Madison confirmed, though not without significant debate about your involvement. Daniel nodded, having expected as much. Richard made sure they knew about Morgan Tower. He did. Madison glanced at him. I did not share the full background about your partner's role, your decision to protect his family. That's your story to tell or not tell. Daniel looked at her in surprise. You know about that? I had you thoroughly vetted before bringing you onto Riverton, Madison admitted. Not just professionally, but personally. I needed to understand who I was trusting with this project. Under normal circumstances, Daniel might have felt invaded by such investigation. But in this case, it had saved him from having to explain his past directly, from having to decide how much to reveal. Thank you, he said quietly, for respecting my privacy while still giving me the chance. Madison nodded, her attention returning to the children, who were now engaged in a debate about whether Stegosaurus plates were primarily for defense or temperature regulation. They seemed to be hitting it off, she observed. Ethan doesn't often find kids who share his enthusiasm for the technical details, Daniel replied, watching his son's animated gestures as he explained something to Chloe. Most 8-year-olds prefer dinosaur battles to discussions of skeletal structure. Chloe's the same way, Madison said, always asking how things work, why they're designed a certain way. It drives her teachers crazy sometimes. They shared a smile of parental understanding, the unique blend of pride and concern that comes with raising a child whose mind works differently than their peers. Would you both like to join us for lunch? Madison asked. The museum cafe is surprisingly good, and it seems a shame to separate them when they're so engaged. Daniel hesitated. The invitation was casual, friendly, a parent-to-parent suggestion rather than a boss-to-employee directive. But the boundaries between their professional and personal worlds were already blurring in ways that made him cautious. Ethan looked back, having overheard. "Can we, Dad? Chloe says they have ice cream sandwiches shaped like dinosaur fossils." The hopeful expression on his son's face made the decision simple. "Sure, if Madison doesn't mind." "I suggested it, didn't I?" Madison replied with a smile. Lunch was surprisingly comfortable, the children dominating the conversation with dinosaur facts and school stories, the adults contributing occasionally but mostly listening with amused interest. Daniel couldn't remember the last time Ethan had been so animated with someone outside their small circle of neighbors and school friends. "Chloe tells me you're working on an earthquake-resistant building for your science project," Madison said to Ethan during a lull in the children's conversation. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. "It's a model that shows how base isolators work. Dad's helping me design it." "Base isolators?" Chloe asked. "They're like special cushions that go under buildings in earthquake zones," Ethan explained. "When the ground shakes, the building can move a little bit without breaking." "Like shock absorbers on a car," Daniel added. Chloe's eyes widened with interest. "Could I see it? Your model?" Ethan looked to his father, hopeful but uncertain. Daniel glanced at Madison, who smiled encouragingly. "Perhaps you and your dad could come over sometime," she suggested. "Chloe has been collecting rocks for a geology display." They could share their projects. The invitation hung in the air, another step across the boundary between professional and personal. Daniel knew he should maintain distance, keep their relationship strictly about Riverton, but the genuine delight on Ethan's face made refusal difficult. "That would be nice," he said finally. "Thank you." As lunch concluded and they prepared to go their separate ways, Madison touched Daniel's arm lightly. "Actually, I have some updated soil reports from the eastern section of Riverton. Nothing urgent, but if you have time this weekend to review them." Daniel recognized the professional pretext for what it was, a legitimate reason for further contact that wouldn't raise eyebrows if mentioned in a work context. "I could stop by tomorrow afternoon," he offered, "after Ethan's baseball practice." Madison nodded. "Perfect. Say 3 o'clock. You have my address." As Daniel and Ethan headed toward the subway, the boy's steps had an extra bounce. "I like Chloe," he declared. "She knows even more dinosaur facts than Tommy, and she doesn't think it's weird that I care about how they're built instead of just how they fought." "She seems like a thoughtful kid," Daniel agreed, ignoring the subtle warmth that had settled in his chest at the prospect of seeing Madison and the reports, of course, the next day. "Her mom is nice too," Ethan added with the innocent directness of childhood. "She listens like she really cares about what you're saying, even when it's kid stuff." "That's a rare quality," Daniel acknowledged, "in adults or kids." They rode the subway in comfortable silence, Ethan reviewing his dinosaur notes while Daniel's mind drifted between micropile calculations and the unexpected turn his carefully compartmentalized life had taken. The professional and personal were bleeding into each other in ways both promising and concerning. Richard Evans's veiled warning from the Bachelor Selection Gala echoed in his memory. "Your mom needs someone who fits into her world. I have my own world to take care of." He'd meant those words when he'd spoken them. But now, watching Ethan's happiness at finding a kindred spirit in Chloe, feeling his own unexpected ease in Madison's company outside of work, Daniel wondered if perhaps their separate worlds weren't as incompatible as he'd assumed. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying, because the higher you build, the farther there is to fall. And Daniel Brooks knew better than most the damage that could be done when carefully constructed structures collapsed. Bomb. Madison's penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of Manhattan's most prestigious residential towers. The elevator opened directly into a foyer with soaring ceilings and walls of glass that framed the city skyline like living art. Despite its grandeur, the space felt lived in, children's books stacked on coffee tables, a colorful throw draped across a pristine white sofa, framed artwork that Daniel recognized as Chloe's hanging alongside what appeared to be museum-quality pieces. "Dad, look at the view," Ethan exclaimed, running to the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You can see all the way to the river." Daniel joined his son, momentarily taken aback by the panorama. The city spread below them, buildings catching the afternoon light, tiny cars moving along street grids, parks providing patches of green amid the concrete and glass. It's something, isn't it? Madison said, joining them at the window. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, yet somehow managed to look as elegant as she did in business attire. When my father bought this place, people thought he was crazy to spend so much on a view. Now it's considered a bargain. It's amazing, Daniel admitted, though I find myself thinking about the cantilever system they must have used for this corner of the building. Madison laughed. You sound like my father. He could never just admire a view. He always had to understand the engineering behind it. Chloe emerged from her room, her face lighting up at the sight of Ethan. You came. Mom said you might. Do you want to see my rock collection? I've got igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary samples all organized by formation period. Ethan looked to his father for permission, then followed Chloe down the hallway, their excited voices fading as they disappeared into her room. She's been reorganizing that collection all morning, Madison said with a smile. I think she was more excited about your visit than she was about her birthday party last month. Ethan too, Daniel replied. He rarely connects this well with other kids. Most find his interests unusual. Like father, like son, Madison observed, gesturing toward the kitchen. Coffee or something cold? Then we can look at those Saul reports. Coffee would be great, thanks. Daniel followed her into a kitchen that somehow managed to be both state-of-the-art and warmly inviting. As Madison prepared coffee, he noticed the subtle signs of real life amid the luxury. A child's drawing magnetized to the refrigerator, a well-used cookbook open on the counter, a slightly chipped mug among the perfect matching set. You mentioned your father bought this place, Daniel said, making conversation. He founded Hale Development, right? Madison nodded, her expression softening at the mention of her father. William Hale started with a single small apartment building in Queens, built it into one of the city's largest development companies. She handed Daniel a mug of coffee. But more importantly, he never forgot why he started building in the first place. To create homes, not just investment vehicles. That's rare in development, Daniel observed. Most builders I knew cared about aesthetics and profit margins, not the people who would eventually live in the spaces. He was unusual that way, Madison agreed, which made him both revered and resented in the industry. After he died 5 years ago, there was significant pressure from the board to shift toward a more conventional approach. Luxury developments, maximum returns, minimal affordable components. But you've resisted that, Daniel noted. Madison's eyes met his. I've tried. Riverton is a key part of maintaining his vision, proving that community-centered development can still be profitable. She hesitated, then added more quietly, it's why your micropile solution matters so much. If Riverton fails, it's not just a project that fails, it's a philosophy. The weight of that statement hung between them, the understanding that their collaboration had implications beyond foundation engineering. Daniel felt a deepening respect for Madison's commitment to her father's vision, her willingness to take professional risks to maintain it. The micropiles won't fail, he said with quiet certainty. The system is solid. The monitoring data confirms it. Madison studied him over the rim of her coffee mug. That confidence, that absolute certainty in your own technical judgment, it's rare, especially after experiencing a significant failure like Morgan Tower. Daniel tensed slightly at the direct reference to his past, but Madison's tone held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Engineering isn't about never failing, he said after a moment. It's about learning from failures to build better next time. Morgan Tower taught me lessons I couldn't have learned any other way. Like what? Madison asked. Daniel considered how much to share. Like the importance of verifying materials personally, not just trusting documentation. Like the need for redundant safety systems. Like, he paused, then finished honestly, like the fact that technical correctness sometimes has to be balanced against human considerations. Madison nodded, understanding the reference to his decision to protect his partner's family. Those are valuable lessons, if painful ones. The most important lessons usually are, Daniel replied. From down the hallway came the sound of children's laughter, followed by Chloe's voice calling, Mom, come see what we built. Madison smiled. Duty calls. The soil reports are on the coffee table in the living room. Why don't you take a look while I check on whatever engineering marvel they've constructed? Left alone, Daniel moved to the living room, finding the reports neatly arranged on the glass coffee table. But his attention was caught by the framed photographs on the wall. Madison with an older man who had to be her father, both dressed in hard hats at what appeared to be a groundbreaking ceremony. Chloe is a toddler in the arms of a smiling man who must have been Madison's late husband. Madison receiving an award, her expression proud but tinged with sadness. Each image offered a glimpse into the life behind the CEO title. The daughter carrying on a legacy, the widow raising a child alone, the professional achieving recognition while bearing personal loss. A complex, multi-dimensional woman so different from the one-dimensional figure he might have imagined based solely on her position. When Madison returned, her expression was amused. They've turned her entire bedroom into a landscape from the Mesozoic era. Apparently, Ethan's earthquake model is going to be tested against a T-Rex attack. Daniel laughed. Sounds like a legitimate scientific inquiry to me. They settled on the sofa, reviewing the soil reports from the eastern section of Riverton. The discussion was professional, focused, but with an ease that hadn't existed in their earlier interactions. The rigid boundaries of boss and employee had softened into something closer to collaborative equals, each respecting the other's expertise. The clay content is higher than expected in section E4, Daniel noted, pointing to a specific test result. We should increase the micropile depth by 2 meters in that area to reach more stable soil. Madison nodded, making notes. What about the water table readings? They seem higher than previous surveys indicated. Spring rains, Daniel explained. The monitoring system accounts for seasonal variation. It won't affect the foundation stability. As they worked, the afternoon light shifted, casting the room in a warm golden glow. The conversation drifted occasionally from technical matters to more personal topics, Ethan's school challenges, Chloe's interest in geology, the difficulties of single parenthood. How do you balance it? Madison asked during one such digression. The maintenance work, the consulting, being there for Ethan? Daniel considered the question. Not always gracefully. Mrs. Ferris, our neighbor, helps with after-school care when I'm working late. The rest is just prioritizing. Ethan comes first, always. Everything else fits around that. Same with Chloe, Madison said. The company demands enormous time and energy, but she's the non-negotiable center of my life. She hesitated, then added, it's why I haven't seriously pursued a relationship since David died. The emotional logistics seem impossible to manage alongside everything else. The personal admission caught Daniel by surprise. Not just the content, but the fact that Madison would share something so private with him. It suggested a level of trust that transcended their professional connection. I understand that, he replied carefully. After Amy left, the idea of adding another relationship to my life seemed overwhelming. Ethan needed stability, not complication. Madison nodded. Exactly. Though Chloe occasionally informs me that I need someone who can fix things in my life. She smiled, referencing her daughter's impromptu speech at the Bachelor Selection Gala. Daniel felt his face warm slightly at the memory. Kids have their own ideas about what we need. They do, Madison agreed. And sometimes they see things more clearly than we do. The moment stretched between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither was quite ready to explore directly. Daniel felt it like a physical presence in the room, this unspoken potential between them that extended beyond professional collaboration. Before either could break the silence, the children burst into the living room, faces animated with excitement. Dad, we're designing a dinosaur museum with earthquake protection, Ethan exclaimed. Chloe has all these awesome books about museum's architecture. And Ethan knows exactly how to make the foundation work, even if there's a magnitude 8 earthquake, Chloe added. Just like that, the moment dissolved, replaced by the immediate demands of enthusiastic children. But something had shifted subtly in the atmosphere between the adults, a recognition of shared experiences, values, and perhaps more. As the afternoon extended into early evening, Madison ordered pizza, and the four of them sat around the kitchen island, the children dominating the conversation with plans for their museum design, while the adults listened and occasionally offered suggestions. Daniel couldn't help but notice how natural it felt, this temporary merging of their separate worlds into something that felt strangely like family. Ethan was more animated than he'd been in months, Chloe practically bounced with excitement over their shared project, and Madison seemed to have shed the careful composure she maintained in her professional life. When it was finally time to leave, Ethan's reluctance was obvious. "Can't we stay a little longer? We haven't finished the design for the dinosaur habitat section." "It's a school night," Daniel reminded him gently, "and we've already stayed much longer than we planned." "You can come back," Chloe suggested, looking hopefully to her mother. "Right, Mom? They can come back to work on the museum design?" Madison met Daniel's eyes over the children's heads, the question implicit. "Of course," she said, "if that works for Mr. Brooks and Ethan." Daniel knew he should maintain boundaries, keep their relationship primarily professional, with occasional carefully managed social interactions. But the hope in his son's eyes made that caution difficult to maintain. "We'd like that," he said. "Maybe next weekend?" As they rode the elevator down from the penthouse, Ethan leaned against his father's side, contentment radiating from him. "That was the best day," he declared. "Chloe gets all my ideas, and she has even better ones I didn't think of. And her mom is nice. She listened to my whole explanation about base isolators and asked really good questions." "She's a good listener," Daniel agreed, thinking about the ease of their conversation. The genuine interest Madison showed in others regardless of their position or status. "Can we really go back next weekend?" Ethan asked, the question tentative, as if fearing the opportunity might evaporate. Daniel nodded. "If you get all your homework done this week." Ethan's face lit up. "I will, I promise." As they walked toward the subway station, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Madison. "Thank you for today. The soil reports were helpful, but the company was even better. Chloe is already planning next weekend's museum design session." Daniel smiled, typing back, "We enjoyed it too. Ethan is already using homework completion as leverage to ensure we return." Her reply came quickly. "Smart kid, takes after his father." The simple compliment warmed him in a way no professional praise had in years, because it wasn't about his engineering skills or his problem-solving abilities. It was about who he was as a person, as a father, the identity he valued above all others. What Daniel didn't know as he and Ethan descended into the subway station was that their growing connection with Madison and Chloe had not gone unnoticed. Richard Evans had his own sources within Hale Development, people who reported on Madison's movements, her visitors, her personal entanglements. And the janitor-turned-consultant spending Sunday afternoons in the CEO's penthouse represented an opportunity Richard had been waiting for. A chance to challenge not just Daniel's engineering credibility, but Madison's judgment in both professional and personal matters. The next phase of Riverton's foundation was about to face a test that had nothing to do with soil conditions or micropiles, and everything to do with the human structures being built alongside the physical ones. Monday morning brought a return to separate worlds. Daniel in his janitor's uniform pushing a cleaning cart through Hale Tower's gleaming corridors, Madison in her executive suite managing the complex business of urban development. The easy companionship of Sunday afternoons seemed distant, almost dreamlike, against the stark realities of their professional positions. Daniel was cleaning the executive floor restrooms when his phone buzzed with a text from Paul, the Riverton site supervisor. "Need you at site ASAP. Problem with eastern section micropiles." His stomach tightened. The eastern section was where they'd just adjusted the depths based on the higher clay content. He quickly finished the immediate task, then called his supervisor to request an early lunch break, citing a medical appointment. 30 minutes later, he arrived at the Riverton site, changing from his janitor's uniform into jeans and a work shirt in his car, before joining Paul at the excavation's eastern edge. The micropiles had been properly installed, the soil conditions accounted for in the design. There shouldn't be unexpected settlement, especially not in a pattern confined to just 3 piles in close proximity. "I need to see the actual piles," he said, moving toward the excavation. Paul followed. "We'd have to remove some of the connection hardware to access them. That means temporary bracing for this whole section." "Do it," Daniel decided. "I need to inspect the physical installation, not just the monitoring data." As the crew began the careful process of exposing the micropiles in question, Daniel's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Madison. "In meetings all morning. How are things at Riverton today?" Daniel hesitated, then typed a measured response. "Minor issue with eastern section. Investigating now. We'll update when I know more. No need to raise alarms until he understood the problem. Engineering challenges were normal on projects of this scale. The key was identifying and addressing them promptly. It took 2 hours to safely expose the micropiles for inspection. Daniel descended into the excavation, examining each component with meticulous care. What he found sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the cool earth surrounding the foundation. The connection bolts have been tampered with, he said to Paul, who had joined him in the pit. These aren't the specification-grade hardware we installed. They're lower tensile strength replacements, and they've been over-tightened deliberately to create stress fractures. Paul stared at the compromised hardware. Sabotage? Daniel nodded grimly. Someone with knowledge of foundation engineering deliberately targeted these specific connection points, knowing they would eventually fail under load and compromise the entire eastern section. Who would do that? Paul asked, though his expression suggested he already had suspicions. Someone who wants the micropile system to fail, Daniel replied. Someone who benefits if Riverton faces delays or redesigns. The implications were clear. This wasn't a random act of vandalism. It was a calculated attempt to discredit the foundation design, and by extension, the judgment of those who had implemented it. Daniel's phone rang, Madison's number. He answered immediately. I just got an urgent message from Richard, she said without preamble. He says there are significant structural concerns at Riverton that require immediate board attention. What's happening, Daniel? Daniel explained the situation concisely, the settlement anomalies, the discovery of tampered hardware, the clear evidence of deliberate sabotage. How did Richard know about this before I did? Madison asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. That's a very good question, Daniel replied. The monitoring data is accessible to the engineering team and site management, but not to board members directly. There was a brief silence as Madison processed the implications. He has someone watching the site, or someone on the inside feeding him information. It appears that way. How bad is the damage? Madison asked, shifting to practical concerns. Localized and fixable, Daniel assured Demur. We've caught it early before any significant structural compromise. I can design a repair protocol that will have us back on track within 2 days. Do it, Madison decided. Document everything meticulously. Photographs, material samples, witness statements. I'll handle Richard and the board. After ending the call, Daniel returned his attention to the sabotage connections. The work had been done by someone with technical knowledge, someone who understood exactly which components to target for maximum effect with minimum obvious tampering. We need security cameras covering the foundation areas, he told Paul. 24-hour monitoring, not just the site perimeter. Already on it, Paul replied, and I'm implementing verification protocols for all critical hardware. Nothing gets installed without double-checking against specifications. As they climbed out of the excavation, Daniel felt a familiar weight settling in his chest, the same dread he'd experienced when he'd first discovered the substandard steel in Morgan Tower. But this time, the failure wasn't due to cost-cutting or negligence. It was deliberate, targeted, malicious, and he had a strong suspicion about who might be behind it. The emergency board meeting was called for 4 p.m. Barely enough time for Daniel to return to Hale Tower, change back into his janitor's uniform, and complete enough of his afternoon duties to avoid suspicion before being summoned to the executive floor. Madison met him outside the boardroom, her expression composed but her eyes conveying the seriousness of the situation. Richard has turned this into a full-blown crisis, she said quietly. He's positioned it as confirmation of his concerns about the micropile design and about your involvement. Not surprising, Daniel replied, but we have the physical evidence of tampering. This wasn't a design failure, it was sabotage. Which raises the question of who had both the access and the technical knowledge to target those specific connection points, Madison noted. The implication hung between them, that Richard might have orchestrated the sabotage to discredit Daniel, and by extension, Madison's judgment in bringing him onto the project. We can't make that accusation without proof, Daniel cautioned. I know. Madison straightened her jacket, a subtle gesture of preparation. For now, we focus on the facts. The damage is localized and repairable. The monitoring system worked as designed, catching the issue before any structural compromise occurred. And most importantly, there's clear evidence of deliberate tampering. They entered the boardroom together, CEO and janitor consultant, united against a challenge that threatened not just a building project, but the vision it represented. Richard was already seated, flanked by two men Daniel didn't recognize, but who carried themselves with the confidence of technical experts. The other board members watched with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity as Madison took her place at the head of the table, and Daniel stood slightly behind her, conscious of his janitor's uniform in this room of expensive suits. "Thank you all for adjusting your schedules for this emergency meeting," Madison began. "As you have been informed, we've identified an issue with a section of the Riverton Foundation. Before we discuss the details, I want to emphasize that the situation is contained, the cause has been identified, and a repair protocol is already being implemented." Richard leaned forward. "With all due respect, Madison, I believe the board deserves a more forthright assessment. The issue, as you call it, is that the micropile system is showing signs of failure. Exactly the concern I raised when this unconventional approach was first proposed." "That's not accurate, Richard," Madison replied evenly. "What we've discovered is evidence of deliberate tampering with specific connection components. This isn't a design failure, it's sabotage." Murmurs ran around the table. Richard's expression remained skeptical. "A serious accusation. Do you have proof of this alleged tampering?" Madison nodded to Daniel, who stepped forward and distributed folders containing photographs, material analysis reports, and comparison charts showing the differences between the specified hardware and the substituted components. The connection bolts in 3 specific micropiles were replaced after initial installation, Daniel explained, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. "The replacements are lower-grade steel with approximately 40% less tensile strength than the specified hardware. Additionally, they show evidence of deliberate over-tightening to induce stress fractures." He clicked to display images on the presentation screen, close-ups of the compromised bolts alongside the original specification components. "This wasn't random vandalism," Daniel continued. "Whoever did this knew exactly which connections to target for maximum impact with minimum visible tampering. They had both technical knowledge of foundation engineering and access to the secured construction site." Richard's skepticism had hardened into something colder. "An interesting theory, but perhaps there's a simpler explanation. That the original design was flawed, and now you're looking for a convenient scapegoat." "The physical evidence doesn't support that conclusion," Daniel replied, maintaining his professional tone. "The stress patterns in the compromised connections are consistent with deliberate over-tightening, not design-related failure. The metallurgical analysis confirms the hardware substitution. And the targeted nature of the tampering, only 3 connections out of hundreds, suggest precise, intentional action." One of the experts Richard had brought, a silver-haired man with an expensive watch and carefully cultivated gravitas, cleared his throat. "While Mr. Brooks's theory is imaginative, the board should consider a more probable scenario, that the micropile system itself is inherently unsuitable for a project of Riverton's scale, as we initially cautioned." Daniel recognized the tactic: discredit the evidence by discrediting its source. Cast doubt on his expertise, his credibility, his right to be in this room at all. Before he could respond, Patricia Winters spoke up. "I'm curious, Dr. Harrington, have you personally examined the compromised connections?" The expert shifted slightly. "I've reviewed the monitoring data and settlement patterns, which clearly indicate—" "That wasn't my question," Patricia interrupted. "Have you physically inspected the actual hardware Mr. Brooks is describing?" "No, but—" "Then perhaps we should reserve judgment until you have," Patricia suggested. "As engineers, we're taught to base conclusions on direct observation whenever possible." Madison seized the opening. "I propose that the board visit the Riverton site tomorrow morning. You can inspect the compromised connections personally, speak with the site supervisor, and review the security measures being implemented to prevent further tampering." Richard looked like he wanted to object but couldn't find a reasonable basis to do so. "The board certainly has the right to inspect the project directly, though I maintain that the fundamental issue is the choice of an unconventional foundation system designed by—" He glanced at Daniel's janitor uniform. the implication clear. By a highly qualified structural engineer with specific expertise in variable soil conditions, Madison finished firmly. Daniel Brooks's current employment position doesn't negate his technical knowledge, which has been demonstrated repeatedly throughout this project. The discussion continued for another hour. Technical questions, concerns about timeline implications, debate over increased security measures. Throughout, Madison defended both the micropile design and Daniel's role with unwavering conviction, while Daniel provided clear, precise answers to technical inquiries without defensiveness or apology. In the end, the board agreed to the site visit the following morning, with Richard's experts included in the inspection team. It wasn't a victory, but it was a chance to present the physical evidence directly, without Richard's filtering or framing. As the meeting adjourned, Richard approached Madison, his voice low but audible to Daniel, who stood nearby. "You're taking quite a risk, Madison, staking your professional reputation on a janitor's technical assessment. I'm standing by a sound engineering solution and the evidence of deliberate sabotage," Madison replied coolly. "The question is, why are you so determined to discredit both?" Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm simply fulfilling my fiduciary duty to the board, ensuring that Hale Development's flagship project isn't compromised by questionable judgment." The emphasis on the last phrase made it clear he wasn't just questioning Daniel's engineering. He was questioning Madison's decision-making, both professionally and personally. "See you tomorrow at the site," Madison said, ending the conversation with practiced diplomacy. 9 a.m. As Richard departed with his experts in tow, Patricia Winters approached Madison and Daniel. "That was illuminating," she said. "Richard seems unusually invested in finding problems with the micropile system." "He does," Madison agreed carefully. Patricia's shrewd eyes assessed Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, I'm curious, what made you choose a janitor's position after your engineering career ended? Most professionals in your situation move into adjacent fields: consulting, teaching, technical writing." The direct question caught Daniel off guard. He considered deflecting, but decided on honesty. "After Morgan Tower, I needed stability more than status. Maintenance work provided that. Steady hours, clear expectations, no professional reputation at stake. It allowed me to focus on raising my son while the dust settled." Patricia nodded, seeming to find the answer satisfactory. "And now, with your expertise clearly still valuable?" Daniel glanced at Madison, then back to Patricia. "Now I'm taking it one project at a time. Riverton matters, not just as a building, but as a statement about development serving communities rather than displacing them. I'm committed to seeing it completed successfully." "Good," Patricia said simply, "because I suspect tomorrow's site visit won't be the end of this challenge." She turned to Madison. "Richard isn't just questioning the foundation design. He's making a play for something bigger." "I know," Madison replied quietly. As Patricia departed, Daniel and Madison found themselves alone in the boardroom, the weight of the situation settling between them. "She's right," Madison said, gathering her materials. "This isn't just about micropiles or tampered bolts. Richard has been looking for an opportunity to challenge my leadership since my father died. He wants Hale Development to focus exclusively on luxury projects with maximum returns, the complete opposite of my father's vision." "And Riverton is the battleground," Daniel observed. Madison nodded. "If he can prove my judgment is flawed, professionally or personally, he strengthens his position with the board." She looked at Daniel directly. "Your involvement gives him ammunition on both fronts." The statement hung in the air, an acknowledgement of the complex entanglement of their professional collaboration and growing personal connection. Daniel understood the implication. His presence in Madison's life complicated her already challenging position. "Maybe I should step back from the project," he suggested, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. "Let the engineering team handle the repairs based on my design, but remove myself as a visible target." Madison's expression hardened. "Absolutely not. That's exactly what Richard wants. To isolate me by cutting off allies who support the original vision of Hale Development." She stepped closer, her voice low but intense. "I didn't bring you onto Riverton because it was politically safe. I did it because your solution was right. I'm not abandoning that principle now." The fierce determination in her eyes stirred something in Daniel. Admiration, certainly, but also a deepening personal investment in her battle to maintain her father's legacy. This wasn't just about engineering anymore. It was about standing for something that mattered. Then we face tomorrow together, he said simply, and make sure the evidence speaks for itself. Madison nodded, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Together. As they left the boardroom, the CEO and the janitor, preparing for a confrontation that would test not just a foundation design, but the foundation of a company's purpose, Daniel knew they had crossed another line. They were now allies in something larger than a construction project, partners in a vision that transcended professional roles. And if Richard Evans wanted to use that alliance against them, he would find they were stronger together than apart, in ways that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchies and everything to do with shared values, mutual respect, and a willingness to stand by what they believed was right. The real test of their foundation was just beginning. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Riverton construction site as Madison's car pulled up to the security gate. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, his posture tense but determined. Today he wore neither janitor's uniform nor business attire, but work clothes appropriate for a construction site. Jeans, boots, and a button-down shirt with rolled-up sleeves. "Ready?" Madison asked, putting the car in park. Daniel nodded, his eyes already scanning the site perimeter where board members and Richard's experts were gathering. "As ready as I'll ever be. The evidence is clear if they're willing to see it." "That's the question, isn't it?" Madison murmured. "Whether they're willing to see what's actually there or only what confirms their existing biases." They exited the car together, approaching the assembled group with matched strides, a united front. Richard stood at the center, immaculate in an expensive suit modified for the construction environment, with a designer hard hat and pristine boots that had clearly never seen a day of actual work. Beside him, his two experts conferred in low voices, occasionally gesturing toward the eastern section of the foundation. Patricia Winters was the first to greet them. "Madison, Mr. Brooks, I trust the security measures have been enhanced since yesterday's discovery?" "Round-the-clock guards and camera surveillance covering all critical foundation areas," Madison confirmed. "Paul has also implemented new verification protocols for all hardware components." Richard stepped forward, his smile practiced and cold. "Quite a dramatic response to what might simply be material failure or installation error, don't you think? Standard procedure when evidence of deliberate tampering is discovered," Daniel replied evenly. "Security is part of quality control on any major project." The site tour began with a general overview of the Riverton development, Madison explaining the mixed-use concept, the affordable housing component, the community spaces designed with the input from neighborhood residents. Daniel noticed how her voice gained passion when she described the project's purpose, not just its specifications. As they approached the eastern section where the compromised micropiles had been discovered, Paul joined them, carrying a tablet with the monitoring data and a box containing hardware samples, both the specified components and the substituted ones found during inspection. "The tampering was confined to these three connection points," Daniel explained, indicating the locations on the site plan, "strategically selected to create progressive failure that would have eventually compromised the entire eastern foundation section." He led the group to the excavation edge, where temporary scaffolding provided access to the exposed micropile connections. "We've left the compromised hardware in place for your inspection, but installed temporary bracing to maintain structural integrity while repairs are pending." Richard's senior expert, Dr. Harrington, descended into the excavation, followed by Daniel and the second expert. The board members watched from above as Daniel pointed out the specific evidence: the substituted bolts, the deliberate over-tightening pattern, the stress fractures developing in precisely calculated locations. "Notice the tooling marks," Daniel indicated, handing Dr. Harrington a magnifying glass. "These bolts were removed and replaced after initial installation, and the metallurgical differences are visible even without laboratory analysis. The grain structure of the steel is clearly inferior to specification." Dr. Harrington examined the evidence in silence, his expression giving nothing away. But the second expert, younger and less invested in Richard's agenda, leaned in with obvious professional interest. "The pattern of stress distribution is consistent with intentional over-tightening," he observed. "And these aren't standard construction bolts. They appear custom manufactured to match the superficial appearance of the specification hardware while using inferior materials. Daniel nodded. Exactly. This wasn't opportunistic vandalism. It was calculated sabotage by someone with technical knowledge and access to specialized materials. Above them, Richard shifted uncomfortably. Speculation without proof doesn't serve anyone, Mr. Brooks. Perhaps the supplier simply provided substandard components. The original installation passed quality control inspection, Paul countered, displaying documentation on his tablet. These specific bolts were verified against specifications and properly installed. They were subsequently removed and replaced in a 36-hour window when the site was supposedly secure. And the security logs for that period? Patricia asked. Paul's expression tightened. Corrupted. The digital system experienced what appeared to be a technical glitch that erased access records for precisely that time frame. A murmur ran through the group. The coincidence was too perfect to be coincidental. The inspection continued for another hour, meticulous documentation of the compromised components. Comparison with the original specifications. Review of the monitoring data that had detected the anomalies before structural failure could occur. Throughout, Daniel provided clear, precise explanations without defensiveness or technical obfuscation. Finally, Patricia called the group together. I believe we've seen enough to draw some preliminary conclusions. Dr. Harrington, would you share your assessment? The senior expert looked uncomfortable, caught between professional integrity and whatever arrangement he had with Richard. The physical evidence does support Mr. Brooks's assertion that these specific connection points were tampered with after initial installation. The metallurgical differences between the specification bolts and the substituted components are significant and would eventually lead to failure under load. So the micropile design itself is not flawed? Patricia pressed. Dr. Harrington hesitated, then conceded. The fundamental engineering principles of the micropile system appear sound, and the implementation throughout the rest of the foundation shows no evidence of compromise. Richard's expression darkened. But we can't rule out installation error or quality control failure rather than deliberate sabotage. Actually, we can, the younger expert interjected, seemingly unable to contain his professional assessment. The pattern of replacement, the specialized nature of the substituted components, and the precise targeting of critical connection points all indicate deliberate action by someone with significant technical knowledge. This wasn't random failure or general negligence. Richard shot him a look that promised consequences, but the damage was done. The evidence and expert assessment aligned with Daniel's explanation. Deliberate sabotage, not design failure. Patricia turned to Madison. What's the repair protocol and timeline impact? Daniel has designed a reinforcement system that not only replaces the compromised components, but adds redundant support to prevent similar tampering in the future, Madison explained. Implementation begins today and will be completed within 72 hours. Overall project timeline impact, 0. She looked directly at Richard as she delivered the last point, a subtle message that his attempt to derail Riverton had failed. As the site visit concluded, Richard lingered, approaching Madison with the smooth control of someone accustomed to recovery after setbacks. Impressive performance, he said, his voice lowered for privacy. Both of you, but this is just one round in a longer game, Madison. The questions about your judgment, professional and personal, remain open. Madison met his gaze directly. My judgment is to pursue the best solutions regardless of their source, to recognize talent and integrity wherever I find them. That's how my father built this company, and it's how I'll continue to lead it. William had vision, certainly, Richard acknowledged, but he also understood practical realities. The board respects tradition, but they respect returns more. Riverton's affordable housing component remains a liability in their eyes. Charity at shareholders' expense. It's not charity, Madison countered. It's sustainable development that serves communities while still generating reasonable returns. The exact balance my father always struck. Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. Times change. Markets evolve. Leaders must adapt or be replaced. He glanced at Daniel, who stood a short distance away, reviewing repair specifications with Paul. Be careful about the company you keep, Madison. Personal entanglements with employees, especially ones with complicated histories, rarely end well for female executives. The thinly veiled threat hung in the air between them. Madison's expression hardened. Is that concern, Richard, or a warning? Consider it friendly advice, from someone who values your father's legacy enough to protect it, even from his daughter's missteps. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Madison with the clear understanding that today's victory was temporary. Richard wasn't finished. Not with Riverton, not with Daniel, and certainly not with his campaign to reshape Hale development according to his vision rather than the Hale family's. Ethan Brooks sat cross-legged on Chloe Hale's bedroom floor, carefully adjusting the base isolation system for their model dinosaur museum. The structure was impressive for an elementary school project, a two-story design with miniature exhibits, tiny dinosaur models, and a sophisticated foundation system designed to absorb seismic shocks. If we add another layer of isolation here, he suggested, pointing to the central support column, it could handle even bigger earthquakes. Chloe nodded enthusiastically, her earlier distress now replaced by focused engagement with their project. And we could add the reinforcement bars here to make the upper floor more stable. From the doorway, Madison watched the children work, struck by how quickly Chloe had recovered once Ethan arrived. When she'd picked her daughter up from school 3 hours earlier, Chloe had been pale and shaking, unable to explain what had triggered the sudden flood of fear that had overwhelmed her during science class. It just came back, Chloe had whispered in the car, the falling feeling, like in the elevator. I couldn't breathe. Madison had brought her home, canceled her afternoon meetings, and sat with her until the worst of the anxiety passed. But it was only when she'd mentioned that Daniel and Ethan might come over later to work on the museum project that Chloe had truly brightened. Could they come sooner? She'd asked. Ethan understands about being scared sometimes. He told me. So Madison had called Daniel, explained the situation, and been touched but not surprised when he'd immediately offered to bring Ethan over as soon as school let out. How is she? Daniel asked quietly, joining Madison in the doorway. Better, much better, Madison replied. Thank you for bringing Ethan. He's good for her. Daniel nodded, watching the children with evident pride. They're good for each other. Ethan talks about Chloe constantly, her rock collection, her ideas for the museum design, the books she's reading. A comfortable silence settled between them as they observed their children working together, heads bent over the model, completely absorbed in their creative collaboration. Did her teachers have any idea what triggered the panic attack? Daniel asked after a moment. Madison shook her head. They were studying plate tectonics, continental drift, earthquakes, nothing obviously connected to elevators or falling. She sighed. Trauma doesn't always follow logical patterns. Sometimes it just resurfaces. I know, Daniel said quietly, and Madison remembered that he carried his own traumas. Morgan Tower, his professional disgrace, his wife's abandonment. Different circumstances, but the same fundamental experience of having life's foundation suddenly give way beneath you. Coffee, she suggested, moving toward the kitchen. The kids seemed settled, and I could use the caffeine. Daniel followed, glancing back once to ensure the children remained happily engaged. In the kitchen, Madison busied herself with the coffee maker, grateful for the simple, normal activity after a day of crisis management. How are the repairs progressing? She asked as the coffee brewed. On schedule, Daniel replied, leaning against the counter. The compromised connections have been replaced, and we're adding the redundant support system tomorrow. Paul has been exceptional, reorganizing crew assignments, implementing the new security protocols, keeping morale positive despite the disruption. He's a good man, Madison agreed. One of my father's early hires. He understands what we're trying to build at Riverton, not just structures, but community. The coffee maker beeped, and Madison poured 2 mugs, handing one to Daniel. They moved to the living room, settling into the comfortable familiarity that had developed between them over recent weeks. A relationship that defied easy categorization, existing somewhere between professional collaboration, friendship, and something deeper neither had yet acknowledged directly. Richard made it clear today that he's not backing down, Madison said after a few moments of companionable silence. The Foundation's sabotage was just his opening move. Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. He sees me as your vulnerability, the questionable judgment he can use to undermine your leadership. He's wrong, Madison replied firmly. Bringing you onto Riverton was one of my better decisions, both professionally and, she hesitated, then finished honestly, personally. The admission hung between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed beyond project specifications and consulting arrangements. Daniel's eyes met hers, and Madison saw in them the same careful balance she felt herself maintaining, between opening to new possibilities and protecting against further loss. Madison, he began, his voice low. We should talk about... A crash from Chloe's bedroom interrupted the moment, followed by Ethan's concerned voice. It's okay. We can fix it. Both parents were immediately on their feet, parental instinct overriding all other considerations. They found Chloe on the verge of tears, standing over a collapsed section of their museum model. Ethan was already gathering the fallen pieces, his expression determined rather than discouraged. The support column wasn't strong enough, Chloe explained, distress evident in her voice. Everything fell when we tested the earthquake platform. Failure is information, not disaster, Ethan said matter-of-factly, repeating what was clearly a familiar phrase in the Brooks household. Now we know we need to reinforce this section. Daniel crouched beside the children, examining the damage with professional interest rather than disappointment. This is exactly how real engineering works, he told Chloe. We design, we test, we learn from failures, we improve. No building gets it perfect the first time. Chloe looked up at him, her expression clearing slightly. Really? Even big buildings like the ones Mom builds? Especially those, Daniel confirmed. Ask your mom about the design revisions on the Carlton Tower project. Madison laughed, joining them on the floor. 7 major redesigns before we broke ground. The architect and structural engineer nearly came to blows over the cantilever specifications. See, Ethan said, already sorting the fallen pieces into categories for rebuilding. We just need to make it stronger where it broke. That's good information. Chloe nodded, her momentary distress replaced by renewed determination. We can use the reinforcement techniques from the book you brought, the ones with the cross bracing. Just like that, the crisis passed, transformed from failure into learning opportunity by Daniel's matter-of-fact approach and Ethan's resilient attitude. Madison watched in quiet amazement as the children dove back into reconstruction, now discussing improved design principles with increased enthusiasm. You handled that perfectly, she said softly to Daniel as they stepped back to let the children work. She would have spiraled into frustration if left to process that setback alone. Daniel shrugged slightly. Engineering is good preparation for parenting. Both require accepting that failure is part of the process, not the end of it. The simple wisdom of his approach struck Madison deeply. In her world of high-stakes development, failure was treated as unacceptable, something to be hidden, minimized, or blamed on others. But Daniel saw it differently, as information, as opportunity for improvement, as a natural part of building anything worthwhile. The article appeared in the business section of a major newspaper, not front-page material, but prominently positioned where it would be seen by investors, board members, and industry colleagues. The headline was carefully crafted to imply concerns while avoiding outright accusations. Hale Development's Riverton project raises questions about leadership decisions. Madison read it at her desk early Monday morning, having been alerted by Jacob Chen before it even hit the digital newsfeed. The piece followed the template Richard had clearly designed, ostensibly focused on the unconventional foundation engineering approach at Riverton, but liberally sprinkled with references to her personal relationship with Daniel, his past connection to Morgan Tower, and carefully worded questions about judgment and professional boundaries. Most concerning was a quote from an unnamed board member expressing worry about decisions potentially influenced by considerations beyond technical merit or shareholder value. The implication was clear. Madison's personal feelings for Daniel were allegedly clouding her professional judgment. They've been surprisingly restrained with the personal angle, Jacob observed, standing by Madison's desk. No photographs of the children, though they do mention family gatherings and social interactions outside of work. Small mercies, Madison replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. Though the professional insinuations are damaging enough, they've positioned Daniel's foundation design as a risky experiment rather than the innovative solution it actually is. Jacob nodded. We should issue a statement, factual, unemotional, focusing on the technical merits of the micropile system and its successful implementation to date. Draft something, Madison agreed. But I want to review it personally before release. This isn't just about corporate messaging. It's about people's reputations and lives. After Jacob departed, Madison sat at her desk, the article open before her, but her thoughts elsewhere. She had anticipated media coverage after Richard's warnings, had known it would attempt to undermine both her leadership and Daniel's contributions. What she hadn't fully prepared for was how it would feel to see their developing personal connection transformed into something suspect, a potential ethical lapse rather than the positive, enriching relationship it actually was. Her phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "I've seen the article. Are you okay?" His first concern being for her rather than himself touched Madison deeply. She typed back, "I'm fine," angry but not surprised. "How are you handling it?" The reply came quickly, "I've had worse press. Though it's unfair to you, your judgment in bringing me on to Riverton was sound, as the foundation performance proves." Madison smiled slightly at his focus on technical validation rather than emotional response, the engineer's perspective shining through even in personal communication. She typed, "The board meeting is Wednesday. Richard will use this to push for changes to the project and possibly to leadership. We need to be prepared." His response was characteristically direct. "Tell me what you need from me. I'm all in." The simple declaration of support warmed her, despite the challenges ahead. That was Daniel, straightforward, reliable, committed. No strategic hedging, no self-protective distancing. Just a clear statement of alliance when it mattered most. Madison was about to reply when Nora appeared at her door, her expression concerned. "Patricia Winters is here to see you. She says it's urgent." Madison put down her phone, mentally shifting gears to handle this unexpected development. Patricia was the board's longest-serving member and had generally supported Madison's leadership, but her arrival unannounced after the article's publication couldn't be coincidence. "Send her in," Madison decided, closing the newspaper and straightening her desk, small gestures of preparation for what might be a difficult conversation. Patricia entered with her usual direct manner, declining the offered seat in favor of standing by the window, looking out over the city with an appraising eye. "I see our friend Richard has escalated his campaign," she said without preamble, nodding toward the folded newspaper on Madison's desk. "He has," Madison confirmed, appreciating Patricia's characteristic lack of pretense. "Though the technical facts remain unchanged, the micropile system is performing exactly as designed despite the attempted sabotage." Patricia turned from the window, her shrewd eyes assessing Madison carefully. "The foundation engineering isn't Richard's real target, as you well know. It's your judgment he's questioning, professionally and personally." "My judgment is sound on both fronts," Madison replied evenly. Daniel Brooks provided an innovative solution when conventional approaches had failed. His expertise saved Riverton months of delays and millions in cost overruns. "And the personal relationship developing between you?" Patricia asked, her tone neither accusatory nor supportive, simply direct. Madison met her gaze steadily. "It's appropriate, transparent, and has no bearing on professional decisions regarding the project." Patricia nodded slowly, seeming to find the answer satisfactory. "I believe you, but perception often outweighs reality in corporate governance matters, as you know." "Richard is deliberately creating a perception problem to advance his own agenda," Madison pointed out. "He wants Riverton scaled back, particularly the affordable housing component, and he's using my association with Daniel as leverage to challenge my leadership." "Precisely," Patricia agreed, "and he's gaining traction with certain board members." Wednesday's meeting will be contentious. Madison had expected as much, but hearing it confirmed by Patricia, who had her finger on the board's pulse more accurately than anyone, made the threat more concrete. "What's your assessment of my position?" Madison asked directly, knowing Patricia would give her an unvarnished evaluation. The older woman considered carefully before responding. "You have support based on your overall leadership record and your father's legacy, but Richard has been methodically building his case for a new direction for months, arguing that market conditions require focusing exclusively on luxury developments with higher margins." She paused, then added with characteristic bluntness, "Your personal connection with Brooks, however appropriate it may be, gives him ammunition he previously lacked. He'll frame it as emotional decision-making, undermining shareholder value. Madison absorbed this assessment, appreciating Patricia's directness despite the uncomfortable implications. In your position? Patricia's expression softened slightly. I knew your father for 30 years, Madison. William built Hale Development on the principle that profitable development and community service could coexist, that buildings should serve people, not just investors. She moved to the chair she'd previously declined, sitting with the deliberate movement of someone who had made a decision. I support that vision, and I support your leadership in maintaining it. But Wednesday's meeting will require more than principles. It will require irrefutable evidence that your approach delivers results. The Riverton numbers are solid, Madison replied. The project remains on budget and on schedule, even with the foundation modifications. The pre-sales for the market rate units are exceeding projections, and the commercial space is already 80% leased. Good, Patricia nodded. Bring that data, all of it, and be prepared to address the personal relationship questions directly rather than deflecting. Transparency will serve you better than defensive separation of professional and personal matters. The advice surprised Madison, who had expected Patricia to suggest creating distance between herself and Daniel until the project concluded, the conventional corporate wisdom for handling such situations. You don't think I should step back from the personal association until Riverton is completed? She asked, wanting to be certain she understood Patricia's position. The older woman's expression turned contemplative. I've observed you and Brooks together at the site visit and in board meetings. Whatever is developing between you appears to be built on mutual respect and shared values, qualities William would have appreciated. She smiled slightly. Besides, attempting to create artificial distance now would only validate Richard's narrative about impropriety. Better to acknowledge the relationship forthrightly while demonstrating that your professional judgment remains sound. The Hale Development boardroom hummed with tension as members took their seats for what everyone recognized would be a pivotal meeting. Madison sat at the head of the table, outwardly composed despite the stakes involved. Daniel occupied a chair along the wall with other project team members, present to provide technical input if needed, but not at the main table. Richard arrived last, the timing clearly deliberate, allowing him to make an entrance when all eyes would notice. He took his seat with practiced confidence, nodding cordially to Madison as if they were colleagues without conflict, rather than opponents in a carefully orchestrated power struggle. Thank you all for adjusting your schedules for this special session, Madison began, taking control of the meeting immediately. As you know, Riverton has attracted media attention regarding both the foundation engineering approach and certain personnel decisions. Today, we'll address those matters directly, with complete transparency. She nodded to Nora, who distributed comprehensive project reports to each board member, detailed analyses of Riverton's technical progress, financial performance, and market position. The facts are straightforward, Madison continued. Riverton remains on schedule and within budget despite the soil challenges encountered earlier this year. The innovative micropile foundation system implemented to address those challenges has performed exactly as designed, with all monitoring data confirming optimal structural integrity. She clicked to display real-time foundation monitoring data on the presentation screen. Graphs showing settlement patterns, load distributions, and stability indicators all within ideal parameters. The pre-sales data for market rate units is exceeding projections by 12%, she continued, moving to the financial overview. Commercial space leasing is at 82%, with signed commitments from community-serving businesses, including a health clinic, childcare center, and local grocery cooperative. And perhaps most importantly, the affordable housing component remains intact at 40% of residential units, fulfilling our commitment to the neighborhood and to the city. Patricia Winters nodded approvingly at this comprehensive overview, while several other board members reviewed the detailed reports with evident interest. Richard maintained his neutral expression, though Madison could sense his impatience with her fact-based approach. He had clearly expected an emotional or defensive response to the media coverage, not this methodical presentation of verifiable results. Now, Madison said, her voice taking on a more personal tone, I'd like to address the questions raised about judgment and decision-making, both professional and personal. The room's attention sharpened, board members looking up from their reports to focus on what promised to be the meeting's most contentious aspect. My decision to implement Daniel Brooks's micropile foundation design was based on its technical merit, cost-effectiveness, and specific applicability to Riverton's soil conditions. That judgment has been validated by the system's performance to date, as the monitoring data clearly shows. She paused, making eye contact with each board member in turn. My decision to maintain a professional and personal association with Mr. Brooks, despite media attempts to characterize it as inappropriate, is similarly sound. His expertise has been invaluable to the project, his integrity is evident in his work, and the friendship that has developed between our families has no bearing on professional decision-making. Richard seized the opening she'd provided. With respect, Madison, that's precisely the concern. The blurring of professional and personal boundaries in ways that could compromise objective judgment. The board has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure leadership decisions are made solely on business merit, not personal preference. He gestured toward Daniel, seated against the wall. Mr. Brooks's background raises additional concerns. As the board is aware, he was directly responsible for the Morgan Tower failure, a significant structural collapse that resulted in injuries and revealed serious code violations. That characterization is incomplete and misleading, Madison countered. The full circumstances of Morgan Tower were more complex than the public record indicates, and Mr. Brooks's technical expertise remains exceptional, as Riverton's foundation performance demonstrates. Richard's expression remained skeptical. Even setting aside the technical questions, there's the matter of appearance. A CEO developing a personal relationship with an employee, particularly one in a subordinate position, creates perception issues that could damage our corporate reputation and shareholder confidence. Several board members shifted uncomfortably at this direct reference to the personal dimension. Madison had anticipated this line of attack and was prepared for it. Hale Development has clear policies regarding professional conduct and potential conflicts of interest, she replied evenly. Those policies focus on transparency, disclosure, and ensuring that personal relationships don't influence business decisions. I have adhered to those policies meticulously. She looked around the table, her gaze direct and unflinching. But let's address the real issue here. This isn't about perception or policy, it's about Riverton's vision and Hale Development's future direction. Madison clicked to a new slide, a photograph of her father at the groundbreaking for one of his early mixed-income developments. My father built this company on the principle that development should serve communities, not just investors. That philosophy guided his decisions for 40 years, creating sustainable growth and lasting value. She displayed another slide, performance metrics showing Hale Development's consistent returns over decades. This approach hasn't compromised shareholder value. On the contrary, it's produced stable, reliable growth through multiple market cycles. Richard interjected, with respect to Williams' legacy, market conditions have changed dramatically. Today's investors expect maximized returns, not social engineering experiments. Is that what you consider affordable housing? Patricia asked pointedly. A social engineering experiment. Before Richard could respond, the boardroom door opened and Jacob Chen entered with an envelope, which he handed discreetly to Madison before exiting. Before we continue this philosophical debate, Madison said, opening the envelope, there's another matter that requires the board's attention. The security investigation into the foundation tampering incident has been completed. This caught Richard off guard, his slight stiffening visible to those watching closely. Madison removed a report from the envelope, scanning it briefly before addressing the board. As you'll recall, 3 critical micropile connections were deliberately compromised with substandard hardware in what appeared to be a calculated attempt to discredit the foundation design. The security team has now completed their investigation, including analysis of access logs, security camera footage, and electronic access records. She placed the report on the table. These are serious implications, Richard. Do you have an explanation for why your assistant's credentials were used during this time frame? Obviously, they were stolen or duplicated, Richard countered. My assistant has no technical knowledge of foundation engineering or access to specialized hardware. This is a transparent attempt to deflect attention from the real issues. Madison's questionable judgment and increasingly personal involvement with a maintenance worker with a controversial past. The meeting teetered on the edge of devolving into accusation and counter-accusation, exactly the scenario Madison had hoped to avoid. She raised a hand to redirect the discussion. Regardless of who was responsible for the tampering attempt, the fundamental facts remain unchanged. The micropile system has performed exceptionally well. Riverton is on schedule and budget, and the project continues to fulfill its promise to provide both affordable housing and economic opportunity to the community. She turned to Daniel, inviting him to join the main table. Mr. Brooks can address any technical questions about the foundation repairs and current performance. Daniel moved to the table with quiet confidence, bringing his tablet displaying the latest monitoring data. The reinforced connections are actually stronger than the original design, he explained, his voice steady and professional. We've implemented redundant support systems and continuous monitoring protocols that would make any future tampering immediately detectable. Several board members asked technical questions, which Daniel answered with precise clarity, avoiding jargon while still conveying the engineering principles involved. Throughout, Richard watched with barely disguised frustration as the conversation shifted from personal accusations back to project performance. When the technical discussion concluded, Patricia Winters addressed the board. We seem to have two separate issues before us. First, the Riverton project itself, its technical soundness, financial performance, in alignment with our corporate mission. Second, concerns about leadership judgment and potential conflicts of interest. She looked around the table. I suggest we address them separately, beginning with Riverton's status. Based on the data presented today, does anyone question that the project is technically sound and financially viable as currently designed? The board members exchanged glances. Even Richard remained silent, knowing the performance metrics were unassailable. Then on the first matter, we appear to have consensus that Riverton should proceed as designed, with the current 40% affordable housing component intact, Patricia concluded. Is that correct? A series of nods around the table confirmed this assessment. Madison felt the first glimmer of victory. Riverton's vision would remain intact, regardless of what came next. Now to the second matter, Patricia continued. Richard has raised concerns about Madison's judgment, particularly regarding her professional and personal association with Mr. Brooks. She turned to Richard directly. However, given the foundation's excellent performance and the concerning security findings regarding the tampering incident, these concerns appear to lack substantive basis. Would you agree, Richard? It was a masterful move, forcing Richard to either back down or double down on accusations that now appeared increasingly suspect, given the security report's findings. He chose a middle path. I maintain that perception matters in leadership positions, he said carefully. Regardless of technical performance, the appearance of personal entanglements influencing professional decisions creates governance concerns, which is why transparency and disclosure are essential, Patricia countered. Madison has been forthright about both the professional collaboration and the personal friendship that has developed. The question before the board is whether there is any evidence, not speculation but evidence, that this relationship has compromised business decisions or shareholder interests. She looked around the table again. I see none. What I do see is a CEO maintaining her father's vision of responsible development while delivering solid financial performance and technical innovation. The shift in the room's atmosphere was palpable. Richard's carefully orchestrated challenge losing momentum as Patricia skillfully redirected focus to measurable results rather than speculative concerns. I move that we formally affirm our confidence in Madison's leadership and in Riverton's current design and direction, Patricia stated, making the motion official, with the stipulation that regular updates on both project performance and the security investigation continue. The vote was called 7 in favor, 2 against, with Richard and his closest ally on the board in the minority. Madison maintained her professional composure, though inside she felt profound relief. The vision would stand, Riverton would proceed as planned, and most importantly, the foundation of integrity she and Daniel had built together had withstood its most significant test. 3 months later, the Riverton development rose steadily against the city skyline. Steel frameworks defining the mixed-use buildings that would eventually house hundreds of families, businesses, and community spaces. The foundation challenges were now just a memory, the micropile system performing flawlessly as construction progressed to upper floors. On the eastern edge of the site, temporary modular classrooms hosted the first sessions of what had been officially named the Riverton Construction Academy, a training program for neighborhood residents interested in construction trades. Daniel stood before a diverse group of students explaining foundation engineering principles with the same clarity and respect he brought to all his technical communications. The most important thing to understand about foundations, he told the class, is that they're not just about supporting weight. They're about creating stability that allows for growth and adaptation over time. At the back of the classroom, Madison watched with quiet pride. The Construction Academy had been Daniel's idea, a way to ensure that Riverton created opportunities for local residents beyond just housing. The board had approved it enthusiastically, recognizing both the community relations value and the practical benefit of developing skilled workers for future projects. Among the students was Miguel Delgado, grandson of a longtime neighborhood resident who had initially been skeptical of any development in the area. The young man followed Daniel's explanation with intense focus, asking perceptive questions that demonstrated genuine aptitude for structural concepts. When the session concluded, students gathered around Daniel with follow-up questions and comments, their engagement a testament to his natural teaching ability. Madison remained in the background, not wanting to interrupt the educational dynamic with her corporate presence. Eventually, the students dispersed, heading to their next session on electrical systems. Daniel spotted Madison and approached with a smile that had become increasingly familiar and welcome over the intervening months. "Executive observation tour?" he asked lightly. Madison shook her head. "More like personal appreciation. You're a natural teacher, Daniel. These students connect with you in a way they never would with traditional instructors." "They connect because they know I respect their questions," Daniel replied. "Most of them have been talked down to by experts their entire lives. Simple respect goes a remarkably long way." They walked together toward the construction site, where the day's work continued at full pace. Workers called greetings to both of them. Daniel, known not just as a consultant now, but as a respected technical advisor and instructor in the academy, Madison recognized as the CEO who regularly visited the site and knew many workers by name. "Miguel Delgado shows real promise," Daniel observed as they walked. "He has an intuitive understanding of structural principles that can't be taught." "His grandfather is one of our strongest community advocates now," Madison replied. "After initially being our most vocal critic, he tells everyone that Riverton is development done right because it creates opportunities, not just buildings." They paused at the edge of the foundation area, the place where their professional collaboration had begun months earlier with micropiles and soil challenges. Now it supported a rising complex that would eventually transform the neighborhood in ways that served existing residents rather than displacing them. "The board quarterly review is next week," Madison said, shifting to more immediate business. "Riverton's numbers are exceeding projections across all metrics. Richard will have difficulty finding fault with either the vision or the execution. He'll try nonetheless," Daniel predicted. "He hasn't abandoned his belief that luxury-only development is the proper direction for the company." "No, but he's lost support on the board," Madison replied. "Even his closest allies have been impressed by Riverton's performance, both financially and in terms of community relations." She glanced at Daniel with a smile. "Patricia actually suggested you should present the Construction Academy results personally. She thinks your authentic communication style would be particularly effective with the more finance-oriented board members." Daniel raised an eyebrow in surprise. "From janitor to board presenter in 6 months. That's quite a trajectory. From janitor to chief innovation officer, if you'd accept the position," Madison corrected, watching his expression carefully. "I've been authorized to create the role and offer it to you formally." Daniel stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Chief innovation officer? That's unexpected." "Is it?" Madison challenged gently. "You've transformed not just Riverton's foundation, but our entire approach to community engagement through the Construction Academy. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of innovative thinking that Hale Development needs as we expand the Riverton model to other projects." She continued, "The position would encompass technical innovation, community education initiatives, and sustainable building practices, all areas where you've already shown exceptional vision." Daniel looked out over the construction site, clearly processing this significant shift in professional trajectory. What about my past? Morgan Tower will always be part of my record. A part that's now properly contextualized, Madison replied. The board has reviewed the complete circumstances, including your former partner's role and your decision to protect his family. They consider it evidence of personal integrity, not professional liability. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, the weight of potential transformation settling around him. From maintenance worker to C-suite executive was a journey he couldn't have imagined when he'd first pushed his cleaning cart through Hale Tower's corridors. Ethan would be ecstatic, he said finally, a smile spreading across his face. He's been campaigning for me to be an engineer again for months. Chloe, too, Madison agreed with an answering smile. She told me very seriously last week that Mr. Daniel should be building things, not just fixing them because that's what he's best at. Daniel laughed. The wisdom of children, seeing possibilities adults have learned to ignore. He turned to face Madison directly, his expression growing more serious. This position, it would change a lot of things. The dynamics between us, professionally, the public perception of our personal relationship. It would, Madison acknowledged, but it would align your official role with your actual contributions, and it would remove the artificial barriers that corporate hierarchy has placed between us personally. The implications hung in the air between them. The recognition that their relationship had deepened over the months of working together, of sharing family time, of building something meaningful, both professionally and personally. I'll need to think about it, Daniel said finally. Talk with Ethan. Consider what it means for our future. Madison nodded, respecting his thoughtful approach, so characteristic of how he handled every significant decision. Of course, the offer remains open. The Hale mansion glowed with evening light, elegant music drifting through open French doors onto the terrace where guests mingled, celebrating the official launch of the Riverton Construction Academy's permanent facility. Unlike the Bachelor Selection Gala months earlier, this event focused on substance rather than spectacle. Community leaders, industry partners, and Academy students all gathering to mark a significant milestone in Hale Development's evolution. Madison moved through the crowd, engaged in conversation with a city council member about expanding the academy model to other neighborhoods. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her attention focused on the substantive discussions rather than social impressions. Across the terrace, Daniel spoke with Miguel Delgado and his grandfather, the three of them examining architectural drawings for the academy's next phase. He looked different tonight, not in a janitor's uniform or casual work clothes, but in a well-fitted suit that reflected his newly accepted position as Hale Development's first Chief Innovation Officer. Nearby, Ethan and Chloe proudly showed visitors a scale model of the Riverton complex they had built together, pointing out innovative features with the confidence of children who had absorbed complex concepts through direct engagement with the adults creating them. Richard Evans observed this scene from the edge of the gathering, his expression unreadable. Though still on the board, his influence had waned as Riverton's success validated Madison's approach and strengthened her leadership position. He maintained a professional demeanor in public settings, though his opposition to the company's renewed community focus remained evident in board discussions. As the formal program began, guests gathered around a temporary stage where Patricia Winters introduced Madison to present the Academy's vision and progress. When my father founded Hale Development, Madison began, he believed that buildings should serve the people who live and work in them, not just the investors who finance them. The Riverton Construction Academy extends that vision by ensuring that development creates opportunities, not just structures. She gestured toward the students gathered at the front. These inaugural Academy participants represent the future of construction in our city, skilled workers who understand not just techniques, but principles, who approach building as both science and service to community. As Madison continued outlining the Academy's curriculum and early successes, Daniel watched from the side, pride evident in his expression. The journey from maintenance worker to executive had been unexpected, but felt increasingly right. A return to using his engineering gifts while maintaining the human focus he'd cultivated during his years in more humble positions. None of this would have been possible, Madison said, approaching the conclusion of her remarks, without the vision and dedication of our new Chief Innovation Officer, Daniel Brooks, who first conceived the Academy and he has shaped its development from concept to reality. She gestured for Daniel to join her, and he moved to the stage amid genuine applause, not the polite acknowledgement often given to corporate executives, but the authentic appreciation of community members who had witnessed his commitment to both technical excellence and human dignity. Daniel's journey exemplifies what we hope the Academy will create for others, Madison continued. The recognition that talent and integrity deserve opportunity, regardless of title or position. That the best foundations, whether for buildings or careers, are built on principle and perseverance. As Daniel took the microphone to outline the Academy's next phase, he briefly caught Madison's eye, a moment of shared recognition of how far they had come from that first meeting in a stalled elevator, where a janitor's hidden expertise had created an unexpected connection that continued to transform both their professional and personal lives. Later, as the evening wound down, Madison and Daniel found themselves on the mansion's rear terrace, taking a moment of quiet away from the constant interaction of hosting. "I've been thinking about foundations," Daniel said after a while, his voice thoughtful. "Not just the concrete and steel kind, but the ones we build our lives on." Madison turned slightly toward him, recognizing the reflective tone that often preceded his most insightful observations. "What about them?" "They need to be both strong and flexible," he replied. "Rigid foundations crack under pressure. The best ones adapt to changing conditions while maintaining their essential integrity." He looked at her directly. "6 months ago, my foundation was stability through invisibility, doing work that kept me below notice, maintaining a predictable life for Ethan, avoiding the risks of visibility that had cost us so much before." Madison nodded, understanding exactly what he was describing. "And my foundation was control through separation, keeping professional and personal worlds entirely distinct, managing perceptions through careful distance, protecting Chloe and myself from potential loss." "Different approaches, same underlying fear," Daniel observed. "Building safe but limited structures rather than risking something more expansive." "And now?" Madison asked, though she already knew the answer from her own experience. Daniel smiled. "Now we've discovered that stronger foundations can support larger structures, that what we thought were our limits were actually just the boundaries of our fear." He reached for her hand, a simple gesture that nonetheless represented a significant shift from the careful professional distance they'd maintained in public settings. "I accepted the Chief Innovation Officer position not just because it lets me use my engineering skills again, but because it allows me to stop pretending that what's developing between us is just professional collaboration or casual friendship." Madison's fingers intertwined with his, the connection feeling both new and somehow familiar. "The children figured it out months ago," she said with a soft laugh. "Chloe informed me recently that we're obviously a family now, just without the paperwork." Daniel laughed. "Ethan said something similar, though he added that we should probably make it official because it would improve structural stability." "Engineering metaphors run deep in your family," Madison observed with amusement. "They do," Daniel agreed, "but in this case, I think he might be right about the structural principles involved." He turned to face her fully, still holding her hand. "Madison, I don't know exactly what we're building here between us, between our families, but I know it's the most important project I've ever worked on, and I know I want to continue designing and constructing it together, whatever form it ultimately takes." The simple sincerity of his declaration touched Madison deeply. So different from the calculated approaches of the corporate suitors Richard had paraded before her, yet infinitely more meaningful for its authenticity. "I want that too," she replied, "to build something real together, something that lasts not because it's perfect, but because it's founded on truth and mutual respect." From inside came the sound of Chloe's laughter, mingled with Ethan's excited voice. The children clearly engaged in some shared enthusiasm that transcended the adult world of business and social positioning surrounding them. "Our most important foundation project," Madison observed, glancing toward the sound. Daniel nodded, his expression softening further. "The one that matters most, and the one that brought us together in the first place. Whatever rose from this foundation would be built on the principles they both valued most. Integrity that couldn't be compromised, connections that adapted without breaking, and the recognition that the most important structures were the ones that served human needs rather than merely impressive appearances. Together, they were building a future, not just for Riverton or Hale development, but for themselves and their children. A future founded on the bedrock of who they truly were, rather than the shifting sands of title or position. And like all the best foundations, it promised to support whatever they might dream of building next.